The slap cracked across that little cafe like a rifle shot. Every cup stopped halfway to every mouth. A billionaire in a $4,000 coat stood there with her palms still stinging, breathing hard, staring at a mechanic in a torn work jacket who hadn't moved an inch. A 7-year-old girl clinging to his leg, her face buried in his hip so she wouldn't have to see. He didn't hit back. He didn't even raise his voice. He just turned his head slowly, and the light caught the scar running down the left side of his face. And that's when her own bodyguard walked through the door and went white as a sheet. Because he'd seen that scar before. In a place he'd spent 11 years trying to forget. Stay with me to the end of this one, folks. And do me a favor, drop the name of your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. If you believe a man's worth isn't measured by his paycheck, hit subscribe. Let's begin. Ethan Carter woke up at 4:40 in the morning, the way he'd woken up for the last 6 years, a full 20 minutes before the alarm eyes open in the dark listening. Old habit, the kind that doesn't wash out. He lay still for a minute and counted the sounds of the apartment. The refrigerator kicking on. A car passing on Fremont Avenue. The little hitch and sigh of a 7-year-old girl breathing in the next room. That last one was the only one that mattered. He got up, put the coffee on, and stood in the kitchen in the dark while it brewed, because turning on the light meant admitting the day had started. At 5:15, he cracked her door. Lilybug. Nothing. Lily, time to fly. A groan came out from under a mountain of blankets. 5 more minutes. That's what you said yesterday, and then you ate breakfast in the truck like a raccoon. I like being a raccoon. Raccoons don't get pancakes. The blankets exploded. By 6:05 they were in the truck, a 1998 Ford, that Ethan had rebuilt twice with his own hands, engine running smooth as a sewing machine, even if the body looked like it had lost an argument with a hailstorm. Lily sat in the passenger seat with her backpack on her lap and her seatbelt double-checked, because he always double-checked. Dad. Yeah. Marissa says her dad has a car with heated seats. Marissa's dad has a Camry. So a Camry is a very nice car, Ethan said, and I'm very happy for Marissa's dad, and this truck will still be running when that Camry is a soup can. Lily thought about that. Is that a burn? That's just engineering, sweetheart. She laughed. It was the sound he built his whole life around, that laugh, first thing in the morning, in a cold truck with the heater rattling. 6 years he'd been doing this alone. 6 years since Sarah. There were mornings early on when he genuinely did not know how he was going to physically get out of the bed. And what got him out of it wasn't strength or duty or anything you'd put on a poster. It was that a 4-year-old girl needed her hair braided and nobody else was going to do it. That was it. That was the whole thing. The cafe was called Rosie's. It sat on a corner in Fremont with a green awning that had faded to gray 11 tables, a chalkboard menu that hadn't changed in 4 years, and a bell over the door that rang whether you wanted it to or not. It wasn't fancy. That was the point. Morning, Ethan. Morning, Rosie. Rosie Delgado was 63 years old, 4'11", and ran that cafe like the deck of a destroyer. She'd bought the place with her husband in 1994, buried him in 2011. Kept the place anyway because what else was she going to do? Stop the usual pair of criminals, she said. Table 6 is open. Table 6 is always open, Rosie. That's because I don't let anybody else sit there and you know it. She leaned over the counter and pointed a pen at Lily. You. What grade are you in now, the 8th? Second. Second. You're getting cheated. You're too smart for second. That's what I said, Lily hollered, dragging her father toward the table. There were 4 other people in the cafe. Ethan knew all of them. He knew them the way you know people when you show up at the same place at the same time every single morning for 4 years. Walt Hennessy. 71 corner booth, black coffee newspaper, an actual paper newspaper folded into quarters, like a man who'd learned to read on a bus. 31 years with the Seattle Fire Department. 2 bad knees and a laugh like a garbage disposal. Dennis, the kid. 24. Laptop headphones. Some kind of tech job he'd tried to explain to Walt once. and both of them had come away confused and slightly offended. And Angela in scrubs coming off the night shift at Harborview drinking coffee, like it was medicine, which for her it was. That was the room. That was the whole world at 6:20 in the morning. Ethan got Lily settled and put a napkin in her lap, which she immediately removed and put back, and she removed again. "Pancakes," she announced. "You had pancakes yesterday." "That's how I know they're good." "Can't argue that." Walt called from the corner without looking up from his paper. "Walt, do not encourage her." "Kid's got a point, Carter. Kid's got a career in law." Rosie brought the pancakes. Ethan cut them into pieces which Lily said she was too old for, and which she also did not stop him from doing. He watched her eat. That was mostly what he did in the mornings. He had 35 minutes between dropping her at school and clocking in at the shop, and he spent them the same way every day, sitting in a plastic chair watching a little girl eat pancakes, and thinking that if a man got to do that every morning, he had no business complaining about anything. His hands were wrecked. Knuckles scarred 2 fingers that had been broken and set wrong a permanent black line of grease under the nails that no amount of scrubbing would take out. He caught Lily looking at them once a year ago. "Your hands are dirty," she'd said. "Yep. Marissa's dad has clean hands." And he'd said, "That's because Marissa's dad has a different job, and that's fine. Somebody's got to have clean hands." And she'd nodded satisfied and never brought it up again. But he'd thought about it for a week. At 6:31, the bell over the door rang, and the whole temperature of the room changed. She came in on a phone call, and she did not stop talking. Not for the door, not for the bell, not for the fact that 11 tables worth of human beings were sitting there. "No, Ronald. Listen to me. Listen. I don't care what the board said in the room. I care what the board is saying now. And if Hallman is walking this back, then Hallman doesn't get to walk into my building on Monday and pretend Victoria Harrington was 44 years old and looked like she'd been assembled in a wind tunnel. Coat the color of bone cut in Milan. Heels that hit the floor like a metronome. Hair pulled back so tight it looked structural. She had built Harrington Dynamics from a 2-room office into a company with 9,000 employees and a market cap that got mentioned on television. She had done it in 19 years. She had done it as she liked to remind people, without a safety net, without a last name that opened doors, and without anybody's permission. And she had spent the last 11 hours watching a $2 billion acquisition come apart in her hands. Her driver was outside. Her assistant was outside. She had come in here because the place she usually went was closed, and because it was 6:31 in the morning, and because she needed coffee before she went into a room and fired somebody. "Because I built it, Ronald. That's why. That is the entire reason why." She snapped her fingers at Rosie without looking. Just snapped them twice the way you'd call a dog. "Coffee. Black. To go." Rosie's eyebrows went up about a 1/4 inch. Walt lowered his newspaper. "Ma'am, we do table service here." "Hang on, Ronald." Victoria pulled the phone away from her ear and finally looked at Rosie, and her eyes did that thing that certain people's eyes do, where they take you in, sort you, price you, and file you all in about a second and a half. "Coffee. Black. To go. I'm not sitting down." "Sure thing, hon," Rosie said pleasantly, and turned to the machine. Ethan didn't look up. He'd learned a long time ago that the fastest way to be left alone was to not exist. He cut another piece of pancake. Lily, on the other hand, was staring. "Dad," she whispered, "that lady's coat is white." "Mm-hmm. It's white. That's crazy. You'd get everything on it." "Eat your pancakes." "But it's white." "Lily, pancakes." Here's the thing about a small cafe at 6:30 in the morning. There's about 18 inches between table 6 and the pickup counter. That's it. That's the whole aisle. Rosie had been meaning to fix it for a decade, and Victoria Harrington was standing in it, pacing phone jammed against her ear coat, swinging because she was the kind of person who could not physically hold still while losing an argument. "No. No, I want you to say it. Say the number. Say it out loud because I want to hear what it sounds like when you say it." Lily reached for her orange juice, and Ethan saw it happen. The elbow, the sleeve, the cuff of her sweater catching on the edge of the glass, and he had a hand halfway there, and he was 1/10 of a second too slow. The juice went over, and it went sideways, and it hit the floor, and it splashed, and about 4 ounces of Tropicana caught the hem of a bone-white coat from Milan. The cafe went dead quiet. Victoria stopped mid-sentence. She looked down. "Ronald," she said very calmly, "I'm going to call you back." She hung up the phone, and Lily, who was 7, and who had never in her life done anything on purpose that was mean, went absolutely rigid in her chair, and said in the smallest voice in the world, "I'm sorry." Ethan was already up. He had a wad of napkins in his hand. "That's on me," he said. "Ma'am, I've got it. Let me—" "Don't. It's orange juice. It'll come out with club soda and cold water. Don't let it dry. That's the only thing—" "Don't touch me." Ethan stopped, napkins in his hand. He straightened up slow and put his hands where she could see them and said, "Okay." Victoria stared at the stain. She was breathing through her nose. She'd been up for 31 hours. She had lost $2 billion in a conference room in a building she owned to a man who had smiled at her while he did it, and she had not been able to say a single word about it, because that's the game. And she'd learned the game, and the game says, you take it and you smile back. And now there was orange juice on her coat. And the person who did it was small and had no lawyers. She turned on Lily. "Do you know what this cost?" Lily's chin went down toward her chest. "Look at me. Do you know what this cost?" "Hey!" Ethan stepped, not fast, not aggressive. Just one step, and somehow he was between them. "You want to be mad? Be mad at me. She's 7. Then maybe at 7 she should have learned to sit still. She's a kid in a cafe at 6:30 in the morning. Kids spill things. That's the whole job description. Is it? Victoria's eyes came up and hit him full on, and she gave him the same 1.5-second appraisal she'd given Rosie. Jacket Carhartt, 10 years old, torn at the cuff. Boots, steel toe, salt-stained. Hands ruined. Face tired, unshaven, and cut down the left side with a scar that ran from the temple to the jaw like a seam. Filed. "What do you do?" she said. "Ma'am." "For a living? What do you do?" Ethan blinked. "I'm a mechanic." "Where?" "Ballard." "Why?" "Because I'd like to know," Victoria said. "Who's going to be paying for this coat?" Behind the counter, Rosie set down the coffee cup very hard. Walt Hennessy folded his newspaper all the way closed and set it on the table. Ethan didn't move. "How much is the coat?" he said quietly. "You can't afford it." "How much is the coat?" Victoria said a number, and Ethan Carter, who had made $52,000 last year before taxes, who had $1,900 in a savings account labeled Lily College in his own handwriting on a paper envelope, who had not bought himself a new pair of jeans since 2021, did not flinch. "I'll pay for the cleaning," he said. "Cleaning's fair. That's what I owe you, and I'll pay it. I'm not buying you a new coat for 4 ounces of orange juice because that's not fair, and I think you know it." "You think I know it?" "Yes, ma'am, I do." That's the moment it turned. Because Victoria Harrington had spent 19 years in rooms full of men who could buy and sell that cafe with what they had in their checking accounts, and not one of them, not one had ever said, "I think you know it," to her face. And this man in a torn jacket, holding a fistful of napkins, had just done it. Calmly, like he was quoting a price on a brake job. "What's your name, Ethan?" "Ethan what?" "Just Ethan's fine." "Ethan what?" "Ma'am, we don't need to do this." "Carter." She'd seen it. Stitched on the jacket, faded, but there. "Ethan Carter." "That's right." "Ballard, you said." She pulled out her phone. "There are 4 shops in Ballard 5. Ethan's expression didn't change. But something in the room did. Rosie felt it. Walt felt it, Angela. The nurse looked up from her coffee. "You're going to call my boss," Ethan said. "I'm going to make a phone call." "Over orange juice." Over $4,000, Mr. Carter, and over the fact that you're standing there telling me what's fair like you've got a single thing in this world to bargain with." And Ethan, God help him, almost smiled. Not a mean smile, a tired one. "No, ma'am," he said. "I don't have much to bargain with. You're right about that." Then, "But you called it. First thing. You looked at me and you priced me in about a second and a half, and you got it about right. Old truck, old coat, bad hands. You nailed it." He set the napkins on the table. "You just missed the part where none of that's got anything to do with whether I'm right." Silence. Dennis had taken his headphones off. He was not even pretending to work. Victoria's jaw set, because here's what she couldn't do, and she knew she couldn't do it, and it was making something behind her ribs go white hot. She couldn't win. Not here. There was nothing to take from him. You cannot leverage a man who has nothing you want. So she reached for the only thing left. "Where's her mother?" And the cafe went cold. Ethan didn't answer. It's a simple question. Where's her mother? Does she know you've got that child in a place like this at 6 in the morning eating? She gestured vaguely at the pancakes. That before school, Rosie said, "Ma'am?" Because that's a neglect issue, actually. That's a documented, don't. Ethan's voice hadn't risen. It had done the opposite. It had gone very, very low and very, very level, and everybody in the room heard the difference. "Don't do that one." "Why not?" "Because you don't know what you're walking into." "Enlighten me." Ethan looked at his daughter. Lily was sitting with her hands in her lap and her shoulders up around her ears the way she got. She wasn't crying. She was doing the thing she did instead of crying, which was going very still and very quiet and disappearing inside herself. And Ethan had spent 6 years and $11,000 he didn't have on a therapist teaching that little girl she didn't have to do that anymore. And it had taken this woman 90 seconds to undo it. "Her mother's dead," Ethan said. The words landed in that cafe like a dropped plate. "She died 6 years ago in a car on Aurora Avenue. And I identified her body at 2 in the morning at Harborview, and I came home and I sat on the floor of my kids' room until the sun came up, because I couldn't figure out how to tell a 1-year-old that her mother was never coming back." He was still not raising his voice. That was somehow the worst part. "So no, ma'am. Her mother doesn't know we're here. Her mother doesn't know anything anymore." Nobody moved. "And we come here," he said, "because this is the 35 minutes I get between the school and the shop. That's it. That's what I've got. So we come here and Rosie makes her pancakes, and Walt tells her she's too smart for 2nd grade, and for 35 minutes a day, that kid gets to have a normal life." He picked up the napkins again. "Now, I'll pay for the cleaning. I've got about $80 in my wallet, and I'll give you all of it right now. And then we're going to finish breakfast." You want to know what real trouble looks like. It looks like a person who's been handed a chance to stop and can't. Because Victoria Harrington heard every word of that. Every single word. And somewhere underneath 31 hours without sleep and $2 billion, and a man who'd smiled at her while he took it somewhere down there, a small voice said, "Stop, stop right now. Apologize and walk out that door, and you will only have to think about this for a week." And she couldn't hear it, because if she stopped now, if she apologized in this room to this man in front of these people, then everything she'd built on top of the girl she used to be would crack. And there was something down at the bottom of that crack she had not looked at in 30 years and had no intention of looking at this morning. So she did what she always did. She went harder. "That's a very good speech," she said. Walt Hennessy said lady. "Do you use it often?" "Ma'am," Rosie said, coming around the counter now. "I'm going to have to ask you to—" "Because I've heard it before, Mr. Carter. Different words, same speech. I've had a hard life, so the rules bend for me." She was leaning in now. "But here's the thing nobody tells you. Everyone's had a hard life. Everyone. I had a hard life. And I didn't get to hand it to strangers as an invoice." And Ethan Carter said the only thing he said that whole morning that had any heat in it at all. He said, "I didn't hand you anything. You went in my pocket and took it." Victoria's hand came up. Later, much later, she would try to explain it in a room to a woman with a notepad. She would say, "I don't know why I did it," and that would be a lie, and the woman with the notepad would let her sit with it until she stopped lying. Because she knew exactly why she did it. She did it because for 1 full second in that cafe in front of a fry cook and a firefighter and a nurse and a kid with a laptop, a mechanic in a torn jacket had been the biggest person in the room. And she couldn't stand it. The slap cracked across that cafe like a rifle shot. Rosie's hand flew to her mouth. Angela was half out of her chair. Dennis had his phone up before he'd even decided to just pure reflex thumb hitting, record the way a whole generation does now. And Ethan Carter did not move. His head turned with it. That was all. A little. The way a heavy thing turns. And then it came back. His hands stayed at his sides. Open. Loose. Down. He didn't touch his face. He didn't look at her. He looked down at his daughter, who had grabbed his leg with both arms, her whole face pressed into his hip so hard she couldn't see anything. And Ethan Carter put one wrecked, grease-stained hand on the back of his little girl's head and held it there so she wouldn't have to look. "It's okay, Bug," he said. His voice didn't shake, not one bit. "It's okay. I'm right here. We're okay." Nobody in that cafe ever forgot the next 4 seconds. Not Rosie, who'd buried a husband and watched a man come in for 4 years and never once ask for a thing. Not Angela, who worked a trauma ward and had a professional read on what people look like when they're about to lose control, and who was watching this man's hands and could not find a single tremor in them. Not Walt Hennessy, 71 years old, 31 years in the fire service, who had pulled people out of buildings and had seen exactly 2 kinds of men in his life, the kind who need everybody to know how strong they are, and the other kind. Walt was standing now. He didn't remember standing. And Victoria Harrington stood there with her hand still up, still stinging her chest, going like she'd run up a flight of stairs, and she was waiting. She was waiting for him to hit back. She needed him to hit back. Because if he hit back then, she was right about him. If he hit back then, he was just an angry man in a torn jacket, and everything she'd said was true, and she could walk out of this cafe and be exactly who she was when she walked in. He didn't hit back. He didn't say one word to her. He just stood there, holding his daughter's head against his side, and looked at her, and there was nothing in his face. Not rage, not fear. Something worse. Pity. He looked at her the way you look at somebody who's already lost something and doesn't know it yet. And Victoria Harrington's hand started to shake. "Ma'am," Rosie's voice, flat as a griddle. "Get out of my restaurant." Victoria didn't move. "I said get out." Rosie was 5 feet away with a coffee pot in her hand and 40 years behind her eyes. "I have been in this room since 1994. I have thrown out drunks, and I have thrown out cops, and I threw out a man once for talking to my waitress wrong, and I have never not one time had somebody put a hand on a customer in my house. You get out. Do you know who I am?" And Walt Hennessy laughed. Out loud. One ugly bark of a laugh from the corner booth. "Oh, honey," Walt said. "You really don't want anybody knowing who you are right now." Victoria's phone was in her hand. She was going to call someone. She didn't know who. Her assistant. Her lawyer. Her driver standing 30 feet away on the sidewalk with no idea what was happening in here. The stain on her coat had gone from bright orange to a dull, dark, ugly amber because Ethan had been right. It was setting, because nobody had put cold water on it, because she wouldn't let him. And she looked down at that stain and up at the man. And something in her chest was doing something she had not permitted it to do since 1996. "You're going to regret this," she said. Her voice cracked in the middle of it. Ethan Carter said nothing. He crouched down. Slowly, knees popping, down to his daughter's level with a red handprint blooming across the left side of his face right over the scar, and he took Lily's shoulders in both hands and turned her gently so she was facing him and nothing else. "Hey," he said. "Look at me. Just me." Her eyes came up. Huge. Wet. "Did I do something bad?" she whispered. And that was the only moment in the whole morning where Ethan Carter's voice came apart. Just a hairline crack. A half second. "No," he said. "No, baby. You spilled some juice. That's all you did in this whole world. You spilled some juice." "But she—" "Some people are carrying something real heavy," he said, "and they get tired. And when they get tired, they drop it on whoever's standing closest. That's not about you. That's never about you." "Are you okay?" Ethan smiled at her, with a handprint on his face. "Bug, I have been hit by a helicopter door." Lily made a noise that was half a sob and half a laugh. "Yeah," he said. "So." And that's when the bell over the door rang. It rang hard. The door came in fast enough to bang the wall, and a man came through it like a truck coming through a fence. He was big, not gym big. Built big, the kind of frame that comes from carrying weight for a living. Charcoal suit that didn't quite fit him, because nothing fits a man shaped like that. Earpiece. Flat sweeping eyes that took the room in a single pass, exits hands distance the way you take a room in when that's the actual job. Marcus Reed had been standing on the sidewalk for 6 minutes. He'd heard the crack through the glass. Ms. Harrington. He was already moving, already reading the room the way he'd been trained to. Principal upright, unharmed. Civilian male crouched, kid attached. Threat assessment, the guy on the floor. "Ms. Harrington, are you—" "He's—" Victoria's voice was somewhere she didn't recognize. "Get him out of here." "Yes, ma'am." Marcus crossed the cafe in 4 steps. "Sir, on your feet. Let's go." And Ethan Carter stood up with his daughter's hand in his and turned around. And the light from the window over table 6 hit the left side of his face. Marcus Reed stopped. Not slowed. Stopped dead mid-stride, one hand still coming up, like somebody had pulled the plug out of the back of him. Because that scar didn't run the way a bar fight runs. It didn't run the way a car wreck runs. It ran from the temple to the jaw in one clean seam, and Marcus Reed had watched it happen. He had watched it happen at 0340 on a night 11 years ago, and 4,000 miles from Fremont, from flat on his back with his femur in 2 pieces, and his squad leader dead, 6 feet to his left, while a man he'd never seen before came out of the smoke, took a piece of a door frame across the face, didn't stop, didn't slow, and picked him up off the ground. Marcus had never gotten a name. Nobody got the name. You didn't get the name that was the whole point of that unit. His hand was still up in the air. His mouth was open. And in 11 years of standing behind the most powerful woman in Seattle, Marcus Reed had never once, not one single time, made a sound she hadn't asked for. He made one now. Ghost. The word came out of Marcus Reed's mouth at 6:41 in the morning, and it landed in that cafe like something dropped from a great height. Ghost. Nobody knew what it meant. Not Rosie, not Walt, not Angela, not Dennis, with his phone still recording under the edge of the table. It wasn't a word. It was a sound a big man made when the floor went out from under him. Ethan Carter stood very still with his daughter's hand in his, and Marcus watched the thing he was afraid of. He watched the man's face do nothing at all. No confusion. No, "What did you call me?" No, "Excuse me, buddy? I think you've got the wrong guy." Nothing. Which was the answer? "Marcus." Victoria's voice came from somewhere behind him, thin and impatient, and about to break. "Marcus, I said get him out." Marcus didn't move. "Marcus." "Ma'am?" He said it without turning around. "Give me a second." "I don't have a second. I have a—" "Ma'am." And that was different. That was a tone she had never heard out of him in 11 years, and it stopped her the way a hand on the chest stops you. "Please, give me a second." Rosie Delgado stood behind her counter with the coffee pot still in her fist and watched a 240-pound man in a suit forget how to breathe. Marcus took 1 step forward. Slow. Both hands open at his sides now, the way you approach something you don't want to spook. "Sir," he said, "would you look at me?" Ethan looked at him, and Marcus Reed's eyes went straight to the scar and traveled it top to bottom, temple to jaw, like a man reading a name off a headstone. "Where'd you get that?" "Working," Ethan said. Working where? Sir, my daughter's had a rough morning. We're gonna go. Where'd you get the scar? I'm gonna take her to school now. Where did you get the scar? And Ethan Carter said very quietly, You know where I got the scar? Marcus Reed's face came apart. It came apart the way a wall comes apart, which is to say, all at once, and from the inside. Rosie said later that she thought the man was having a heart attack. Angela, the nurse, said later that she'd have bet money on it, and that she'd have lost, and that in 12 years at Harborview, she'd only seen a face do that maybe 4 times, and every one of those times, somebody had just learned that a person they'd buried was alive. 19 guys walked into that valley, Marcus said. His voice had gone to gravel. 9 of us walked out. I wasn't one of the 9. I got carried. Marcus, Victoria said, what are you doing? I got carried 400 meters by a man who took a door frame across the face at 0340 and didn't stop. Marcus, I never got his name. Marcus's eyes had gone red at the rims, and he was not blinking because if he blinked, it was going to come. 11 years. Nobody would tell me his name. I filed for it. Twice. Both times it came back redacted. Both times. Marcus, I am talking to you. And Marcus Reed turned around. That was the moment if you want to know. Not the slap, not the scar, that. Because in 11 years, Marcus Reed had never turned around. He had stood behind that woman in 9 countries. He had walked her out of 2 rooms she should not have walked out of. He had taken a bottle to the shoulder in Chicago and never mentioned it. He had been furniture, and he had been good at being furniture, and it paid $140,000 a year, and he had a daughter of his own in Kent who was starting community college in the fall. He turned around. Ma'am, he said. What did you just do? Victoria's chin came up. Excuse me. I heard it through the glass. He pointed at the window with 2 fingers, and his hand was shaking. I was standing right there, and I heard it through the glass, and I want you to tell me. What did you just do? He was... There's a handprint on his face. He was threatening me. Ma'am. And Marcus Reed's voice cracked straight down the middle of it. There's a handprint on his face. Silence. At table 6, Lily Carter had both arms around her father's leg again and was looking up at the big man in the suit with enormous eyes, because the big man in the suit was crying, and she had never in her life seen a grown man cry standing up. Victoria Harrington looked around her. Nurse half out of a chair. Firefighter on his feet. Fry cook with a coffee pot. Kid with a phone. And her own man, whose salary she signed, whose insurance she paid, whose daughter's tuition she had once written a check for at a Christmas party without even thinking about it, standing between her and a mechanic with his back to her. You work for me, she said. Yes, ma'am. Then work. And Marcus Reed said no, it wasn't loud. That's the thing people always got wrong when they told this story later. Nobody yelled. Not once that whole morning. The loudest thing that ever happened in that cafe was a hand on a face. No. No, ma'am. You're fired. Yes, ma'am, Marcus said. I figured. And he turned back around and looked at Ethan Carter and said, Sir, I got a daughter too. Ethan closed his eyes for about half a second, which was the only crack anybody saw in him that entire morning, and it wasn't for the slap. It was 6:43. Then Walt Hennessy said from the corner booth, Somebody want to tell me what in the hell is going on? And that broke it. Just for a second. Angela let out a breath she'd been holding for a minute and a half. Rosie set the coffee pot down. Dennis, 24 years old, sitting there with his phone under the table and his heart going like a bird, realized he had recorded all of it every second from the snap of her fingers at Rosie to right now. He didn't stop recording. Nothing's going on, Ethan said. Walt, it's fine. Son, that is not fine. Walt, you got a mark on your face. It's a mark. I've had marks. Carter. Walt. And Ethan finally raised his voice half an inch, and the whole room heard it. He caught himself immediately. He put a hand up. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Walt. I've got 30 minutes to get her to school, and I'm not doing this in front of her. That's it. That's the whole thing. I'm not doing this in front of her. And Walt Hennessy, 71 years old, 31 years in the fire service, sat back down. Because he'd been a father too once when it counted. Ethan crouched. Bug, grab your backpack. Lily didn't move. Lily, backpack. Are they gonna arrest you? And Rosie Delgado made a sound behind the counter like somebody had stepped on her. No, Ethan said. No, baby, nobody's arresting anybody. Grab your bag. She grabbed her bag. She put it on both shoulders the way he'd taught her because one strap wrecks your back. And she took his hand. And Ethan Carter walked his daughter toward the door of a cafe he'd eaten breakfast in every weekday morning for 4 years past. A billionaire past her bodyguard, past 11 tables, and 4 people who would tell this story for the rest of their lives. He got 3 steps. Wait, Victoria said. He kept walking. I said wait. He kept walking. And Victoria Harrington heard her own voice say, please. He stopped. He didn't turn around. He stood there in the aisle with his back to her and his daughter's hand in his, and the whole cafe held still. It was 6:45. What's ghost? Victoria said. Nobody answered her. I'm asking a question. What is ghost? Marcus? What is? Ma'am, don't. Marcus's voice was wrecked. Please don't. What is it? It's not mine to say. Then whose is it? And Ethan Carter turned around. It's nobody's, he said. It's a nickname a bunch of scared kids gave a guy a long time ago because it was easier than saying what actually happened. That's all it is. It doesn't mean anything. It's not a title. You don't get to look it up. He was looking right at her now. Ma'am, you keep trying to find the thing about me that makes this make sense. There isn't one. There's a guy who fixes cars and a kid who spilled juice. That's the whole story. You just don't like it. That's not... You want me to be somebody. Because if I'm somebody, then what you did in here was a mistake. He said it flat. No heat. And if I'm nobody, then what you did in here was you. Victoria Harrington's mouth opened. Nothing came out of it. And Ethan Carter walked out the door with his daughter, and the bell over it rang, and it was the only sound in the world. It was 6:46. Nobody said anything for maybe 10 seconds. Then Rosie Delgado picked up the coffee cup she'd poured black to go exactly as ordered and set it on the counter with a click. $2.75, she said. Victoria stared at her. Coffee's $2.75. And in a moment that Dennis's phone caught in perfect focus, and that 31 million people would eventually watch Victoria Harrington worth $2.4 billion, stood in the middle of a cafe in Fremont with orange juice drying on a $4,000 coat, and realized she did not have her wallet because her assistant carried her wallet because she had not personally paid for anything in 9 years. She looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at her with his eyes red and his jaw set and did not move a single muscle. Walt Hennessy stood up, walked to the counter, put $3 down and said, "On me. Get out." She left the coffee. Out on the sidewalk at 6:47, Victoria Harrington got into the back of a black Suburban, and her driver said, "Ms. Harrington, where's Marcus?" And she said, "Drive." And he said, "Ma'am, protocol says." And she said, "Drive." And he drove. And she sat in the back of that truck, with her hands in her lap. She was still shaking. That was the part she couldn't get past. Not the coffee. Not the fry cook. Not even Marcus. Her hands were shaking, and they had not shaken in a boardroom. Not in a deposition. Not in an 11-hour negotiation. Not in 2019 when she'd fired 400 people in a morning. Not once. Not ever. They were shaking now. Because of a man who'd looked at her with pity. She pulled out her phone at 6:51 and called her assistant and said, "Ronald's meeting is at 9. I want." And stopped. "Ma'am, I want," she said. "Ma'am, are you?" "Cancel it." There was a pause on the line long enough to fall through. "Cancel the 9. Cancel it." Ms. Harrington, that's the... I know what it is. And she hung up on him, which she never did, and she sat in the back of that truck at 6:52 in the morning and looked out the window at a city she owned 9 buildings in, and heard very clearly in her own head a man saying, "You went in my pocket and took it." Back inside the cafe at 6:53, Marcus Reed was still standing in the middle of the room like a building nobody had knocked down yet. Rosie came out from behind the counter with a cup and put it in his hands. "Sit," she said. "Ma'am, Sit down before you fall down." He sat. Walt Hennessy slid into the booth across from him without being invited, because that's what Walt did. "Fire service," Walt said. 31 years, Seattle. Marcus nodded. "Which valley?" Marcus looked up at him. "Son, I'm 71. I've buried 9 guys. You don't have to say a word to me you don't want to say. I'm just telling you, I know what your face is doing right now." And Marcus Reed, who had not talked about it in 11 years, not to the VA, not to his wife before she left, not to his own daughter, not to the 2 therapists his insurance paid for, and he'd stopped going to after 3 sessions each, put his face in his hands. "He carried me 400 meters, he said. "Okay. I was screaming at him to put me down. I was screaming at him. My leg was..." He stopped, breathed. "I was screaming, 'Put me down. Put me down. You're gonna get killed.' And he didn't say anything. The whole time, 400 meters, he didn't say one word." "Okay." "And I never got his name." Marcus's shoulders were going. 11 years, man. 11 years I've been going around not knowing his name. And this morning I'm standing on a sidewalk on my phone, and he's inside eating pancakes. Angela, the nurse, had come over and put a hand on his shoulder, and he didn't shrug it off because he was done shrugging things off. "And she hit him," Marcus said. Nobody said anything. "She hit him." His head came up and his face was a mess. "That man carried me out of a hole in the ground and she smacked him across the face over a coat, and I was outside on my phone." "Son, I've stood behind that woman for 11 years, Walt said, "and this morning you didn't." Marcus stopped. "I'm just telling you what I saw," Walt said. "I've been sitting in that corner since 20 after 6. I watched a big fella come through that door ready to break a man in half, and then I watched him turn around. That's the part you're going to want to remember. That right there is the whole thing." Marcus Reed wiped his face with the flat of his hand. "I got fired," he said. "Yeah," Walt said. "I heard. 12 years to pension." "Yeah." "My kid starts Highline in September." Walt Hennessy took a drink of his coffee and said, "So what?" And Marcus laughed, wet and ugly, and shocked out of him one hard bark. "So what?" Walt said again. "Son, in 31 years I never met one man on his deathbed who wished he'd stood behind somebody a little longer." It was 6:58. At 7:04, Ethan Carter pulled his truck into the drop-off line at Fremont Elementary and put it in park and did not immediately open the door. Lily was looking at him. "Dad?" "Yeah. Your face is red." "Yeah. Like really red." He flipped down the visor and looked in the mirror. She wasn't wrong. 4 fingers laid across his cheekbone, and the top of the scar coming up purple at the edge of the jaw. He flipped the visor back up. "You gonna be all right today?" he said. "Are you gonna be all right today? Bug?" "You always ask me that and you never let me ask you." And Ethan Carter sat there in the drop-off line at 7:05 in the morning with a handprint on his face and thought not for the first time that this kid was going to be a better person than he was, and it was going to happen fast. "I'm all right," he said. "Promise? Promise. Say it the real way." He held up his little finger. She hooked it with hers hard and shook it twice, which was the rule. "Okay," she said, satisfied, and grabbed her bag. And then she stopped with the door half open, and she said without turning around, "Dad, why did that man call you Ghost?" Ethan looked straight out the windshield. "Because a long time ago I had a different job." "What job?" "I'll tell you when you're older." "That's what you say about everything." "That's because you're 7 and there's a lot of stuff." She thought about it. Then she said, "Was it a good job or a bad job?" And Ethan Carter said, "It was a job somebody had to do." She nodded like that was a perfectly reasonable answer, because she was 7, and she got out and she ran, and she didn't look back, and he sat there until she was through the doors, which was what he did every single morning, and then he pulled out. It was 7:07. At 7:20, he walked into Kessler and Sons Auto in Ballard, and Ray Kessler took one look at his face and said, "The hell happened to you?" "Nothing." "Ethan." "Ray, I've got the Tacoma up on 2 and the brake job's promised for noon." Ray Kessler was 68 years old and had owned that shop for 34 years and had hired Ethan Carter 6 years ago off nothing but a handshake and a look, because Ray had a rule about men who didn't explain themselves. "You want to tell me why?" "No." "You in trouble?" "No." "Anybody gonna come through my door about it?" Ethan pulled on his coveralls and said, "I sincerely hope not." And Ray let it go, because that was the deal. It was 7:23. At 8:11, Dennis Park sat in his apartment in Wallingford, with the video open on his laptop and his hands over his mouth. 4 minutes and 19 seconds. Steady. Audio clean, because that place was small and quiet, and the acoustics were terrible in a way that turned out to be perfect. You could hear the snap of her fingers. You could hear, "Do you know what this cost?" You could hear, "Her mother's dead." You could hear the slap so clearly that it made him flinch every time, even now on the 4th watch. And you could hear a man's voice, steady as a level, saying, "It's okay, Bug, I'm right here." Dennis was 24. He had 800 followers. He had never posted anything anybody cared about in his life. He sat there for 11 minutes with his finger over the trackpad. Because here's the thing, nobody tells you about that moment. It's not brave. It doesn't feel brave. It feels like standing on a roof. He thought, that's a real guy. That's a guy I see every morning. He didn't ask for this. He thought, I don't even know his last name. He thought she snapped her fingers at Rosie. He thought about his mother, who had cleaned rooms at the Westin for 19 years, and who had come home one night in 2009 and sat down at the kitchen table with her coat still on and not said anything for an hour, and who had never told him what happened, and who was dead now, and he would never know. Dennis Park blurred the little girl's face. He wrote 4 words. This happened this morning, and at 8:22 a.m. Pacific Time, he hit post. By 9:15, it had 400 views. By 10:40, it had 60,000. At 11:02, Victoria Harrington's chief communications officer, a woman named Priya Raman, who had spent 9 years keeping this exact kind of thing from ever existing, was standing in a doorway on the 41st floor, saying, "Ma'am, I need you to look at something." And Victoria said, without looking up, "I'm busy." And Priya said, "Ma'am, you are not busy. I need you to look at this right now." She watched it on Priya's phone. All 4 minutes and 19 seconds. She had not seen it. That's the thing. She had lived it, and she had not seen it. She watched herself snap her fingers at a 63-year-old woman. She watched herself say, "Do you know what this cost to a child?" She watched a man say her mother's dead while she stood there with her jaw set, waiting for her turn to talk. And she watched her own arm come up from the outside. For the first time in her life, Priya said very carefully, "Ma'am, do you want to sit down?" "No." "Ms. Harrington, how many?" As of 4 minutes ago, 91,000. It's doubling about every 40 minutes. It's on 2 aggregator accounts now, which means by 2 o'clock it's on all of them. And I need to be honest with you, the audio is the problem. The audio is very, very clear. Victoria Harrington stood in the middle of an office with a window that looked at an entire city and said, "Get me the boy who filmed it." "Ma'am, buy it." Priya Raman closed her eyes. "Buy it. Whatever it costs. Buy the video. Buy the account. Buy the phone." "Ma'am, we can't." "Everything's for sale." "Ma'am?" Priya was 38 years old and had said yes to this woman roughly 9,000 times. If you try to buy that video, and it comes out that you tried to buy that video, and it will come out, it always comes out. Then this stops being a story about a bad morning and starts being a story about a cover-up. And I can survive the first one. I cannot survive the second one. She put the phone down. And with respect, ma'am, neither can you. Silence on the 41st floor. Then what do I do? And Priya Raman said the truest sentence anybody said to Victoria Harrington that entire day. Ma'am, I don't know. I've never had one that was true before. It was 11:09. At 11:34, Ray Kessler came out to Bay 2 and said, Ethan, phone. Take a message. It's for you. Ray, I'm under a truck. Son? Ray's voice was strange. There's a woman on my phone says she's from Harrington Dynamics. The wrench stopped. Ethan Carter slid out from under a Tacoma and lay there on the creeper on the floor of that shop and looked at the ceiling for about 3 full seconds. Ray, he said, how'd they know where I work? I don't know. How'd they know where I work? And Ethan remembered standing in that cafe at 6:38 in the morning saying Ballard and a woman saying there are 4 shops in Ballard 5. He got up and took the phone. This is Carter. Mr. Carter, my name is Priya Raman. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at Harrington Dynamics. Sir, I'd like to start by saying, you called my job. I'm sorry. She said she was going to call my job. Ethan's voice was perfectly level. Ray Kessler, standing 4 feet away, said later, it was the calmest he'd ever heard a man sound, and the most scared he'd ever been. 9 hours ago she said she was going to call my job, and now my job is on the phone. So which one is this? Priya Raman in an office on the 41st floor put her hand flat on her desk. Sir, this is not that call. Then what call is it? Mr. Carter, there's a video. Silence. There's a video of this morning. It's been online for 3 hours. It's at 140,000 views, and it is not slowing down. And I'm calling you because in about 2 hours, somebody is going to find your name, and then somebody is going to find your address, and then somebody is going to find your daughter's school. And I would rather you heard that from me at 11:30 than from a van outside your house at 6. Ethan Carter stood in an auto shop in Ballard with a phone against his ear and felt something he had not felt in 11 years. It came up out of the floor and went through him like current. Not fear. He knew fear. Fear was old news. Fear was a coworker. This was the other one. The one from before. The one he'd walked away from a whole life to get away from. Say that again, he said. Mr. Carter, say the part about my daughter's school. Say it again. Sir, I'm not threatening. Ma'am, I know you're not. And his voice hadn't changed at all, which was the terrifying part. I know exactly what you're doing. You're telling me the truth because the truth is the only tool you've got left. I respect that. I've done that. He turned and looked out the open bay door at a gray Seattle morning. But I need you to understand something, and I need you to write it down, and I need you to say it to her exactly the way I say it. Okay. This morning she came at my kid and I stood there and took it. I took all of it. And I'd take it again tomorrow because that's the job, and the job is I don't get to be that guy anymore. He closed his eyes. But if one person shows up at that school, if one camera gets within 100 yards of that building, sir, then I stop being a mechanic. Priya Raman did not say a single word. You tell her that, Ethan said. Word for word. Don't clean it up. And he handed the phone back to Ray Kessler and went back under the Tacoma. And Ray stood there, holding a dead phone in a shop that had gone very quiet. It was 11:41. At 11:58, Priya Raman walked into Victoria Harrington's office and repeated it word for word, exactly the way he said it, and did not clean it up. Victoria listened to all of it standing up, and when it was done she said, "He threatened me." "No, ma'am," Priya said. "He didn't. He just said, 'Ma'am?'" Priya Raman had a folder under her arm and had made a decision in the elevator. He said if we go near his daughter, he stops being a mechanic. He didn't say what he'd become. He didn't say he'd hurt you. He didn't say he'd sue you. He said he'd stop being a mechanic. She set the folder down. Ma'am, I have been doing this for 15 years. I have been threatened by professionals. That man wasn't threatening you. That man was begging you. Victoria stared at her. Begging me? He's begging you to leave him alone so he doesn't have to find out who he still is. And on the 41st floor of a building she'd put her own name on, Victoria Harrington sat down in a chair for the first time in 33 hours. At 12:15, the video hit 300,000. At 12:31, a woman in Tulsa who had been a waitress for 22 years posted the 4-second clip of Rosie saying $275, and it did 2 million by dinner all by itself. At 1:04, somebody found the name Harrington. At 1:40, the first news outlet ran it. At 2:12, Marcus Reed's phone rang in his kitchen in Kent, where he'd been sitting since 10 in the morning, still in the suit, still with the earpiece in his pocket looking at a wall. He didn't recognize the number. He answered it anyway. And a voice he had heard exactly once in 11 years 400 meters 11 years ago and again at 6:41 this morning said, Marcus, it's Ethan. Marcus Reed's hand went over his eyes. How'd you get this number? You'd be surprised what a guy can still do. Ethan, listen to me. And there was something in Ethan Carter's voice that had not been there in that cafe. Something faster. Something's about to happen and I need you to hear it from me first. What? Your name's in the video. Silence. Marcus, your name's in it. She says it 4 times. Somebody already matched it to your discharge paperwork, and in about an hour, a whole lot of people are going to find out that the man who turned around this morning is a Bronze Star recipient with a leg full of titanium, and they are going to make you a hero. Marcus Reed sat in his kitchen in Kent and said in a voice like a kid, I don't want that. I know you don't. Ethan, I don't want that. I know, brother. Nobody who's earned it does. A breath. But it's coming anyway. And there's one more thing, and this is the part I need you awake for. What? And Ethan Carter said, they didn't just find your name. They didn't just find your name, Ethan said. They found the report. Marcus Reed sat very still in his kitchen in Kent. What report? The after action. Somebody pulled it this morning. It's public. It's been public for 6 years. Marcus, nobody ever went looking because nobody knew what to look for. But now they've got your name and your discharge date, and it took some kid on the internet about 40 minutes. Okay, so read it. Ethan, I've read it. I read it in a hospital bed in Germany. I know what it says. Read it again. Marcus put the phone down on the table and put it on speaker and pulled his laptop over with 2 fingers, and it took him 4 minutes to find it. And Ethan Carter did not say one word the whole 4 minutes, which Marcus would think about later, because that was the same thing he'd done for 400 meters. It was 2:19 in the afternoon. Marcus found it. 19 names, 9 survivors, a date, a location listed only as a training area, a cause of loss listed as rotary wing mechanical failure during a night exercise, and no Carter, no ghost, no rescue, no 4th man, nothing. There's no you, Marcus said. No. There's no you in it. Marcus scrolled up, scrolled down, scrolled up again the way a man checks a pocket he's already checked. It says a bird went down. It says 9 of us got out. It doesn't say how. No, it doesn't. It doesn't say how, Ethan. That's right. It says I was recovered. Marcus's voice was climbing. Recovered. Like a wallet. Like something in a lake. Marcus. Where's the 400 meters? Where's the I was screaming? I was screaming the entire way. Somebody heard that. Somebody wrote something down. Nobody wrote anything down. Then who carried me? Nobody carried you, Ethan said. That's the whole point. Nobody was there. Marcus Reed sat in his kitchen and looked at a piece of paper that had been sitting on the internet for 6 years, telling him that the worst night of his life had been a helicopter with a bad gearbox. "That's a lie," he said. "Yes, it is." "That's a lie, Ethan. I've got a leg full of... I know what you've got." "They gave me a Bronze Star for a training accident." And Ethan Carter said, "They gave you a Bronze Star so you'd stop asking." It was 2:24. Marcus didn't say anything for a long time. Somewhere in the background of the call, a dog barked. Somewhere else, a bus went by. "The 8 other guys," he said finally. "Yeah." "They all signed something, didn't they?" "Yeah." "You knew." "I knew." 11 years I've been filing paperwork and you knew." "Marcus, I signed one too." That stopped him. "I signed one too," Ethan said. "Mine's a little different. Mine's got a clause in it that says I was never in that country, and if I say I was, then a bunch of things happen. To me. Not to you. To me." A breath on the line. "And I have never once broken it. Not to a doctor. Not to the VA. Not to my wife Marcus, and I was married to that woman for 4 years, and she went in the ground thinking I did something with logistics." Marcus Reed put his hand over his mouth. "So here's where we are," Ethan said. "At 6:41 this morning you said a word out loud in a cafe. One word. In front of 4 civilians and a phone. And that phone is at 300,000 views and climbing. And in about an hour, somebody smarter than a kid on the internet is going to put your name next to that word and next to a report that doesn't add up, and they're going to start asking the one question I've spent 11 years making sure nobody asks. Which is what? Who's the guy who isn't in the report?" It was 2:27. "Ethan." Marcus's voice had gone small. "What did I do?" "You didn't do anything." "I said it out loud. You saw a guy get slapped and you said the truest thing you know. That's not a crime, brother. That's the opposite." "Ethan, but now it's coming, and I'm not calling you to yell at you. I'm calling you because when it comes, they're going to come at you first, because you're the one with a name and a face and a Bronze Star and a mortgage." Ethan's voice dropped. "And I need you to promise me one thing. Anything. You don't take a single call. Not one. Not a reporter, not a lawyer, not a guy who says he's from an office. Nobody. You sit in that kitchen and you don't say one word and you let it land on me." "No. Marcus, no." Marcus Reed stood up so fast the chair went over behind him. "No, absolutely not. You already carried me once." "That's not. You already carried me once, Ethan." It came out of him in a roar that rattled the window over his sink, and then it broke right in the middle and came out the other side as something wet and cracked and 20 years younger. "You carried me 400 meters, and you didn't even get to have your name. And now I'm supposed to sit in my kitchen and let you do it again. Is that what you're asking me?" And Ethan Carter said quietly, "Yes." Marcus Reed stood in his kitchen and cried like a kid. It was 2:31. At 2:38, Priya Raman took a call on the 41st floor that she had not expected to take for another 3 days. She had a list. That was how she'd survived 15 years in that job, a list. And the list ran in order of how bad. Reporters were on the list. Aggregators, plaintiffs' firms, the board, the exchange, all of it in order. The name on her screen wasn't on the list. It said, Denton R. She knew that name, the way you know a light switch in a room you grew up in. Ray Denton had been on the Harrington Dynamics Government Solutions Advisory Board for 9 years. He came to 2 meetings a year. He said almost nothing. He had a smile like a closed door, and 41 years of a career he had never once described in a full sentence. She let it ring twice and picked it up. "This is Raman. Priya. Warm. Grandfatherly. How are you, sweetheart?" "I'm having a day, Mr. Denton." "I imagine so." A pause of exactly the right length. "That's a heck of a video." Priya Raman felt the floor tilt about 1.5 degrees. "Sir, if you're calling about the incident, we're going to have a statement by..." "I'm not calling about the incident." Another pause. "I'm calling about the audio." "The audio." There's a fella in that video, Priya. Big fella. And at about the 2-minute mark, he says a word. Priya Raman looked at the phone in her hand. Sir, are we talking about a nickname? We're talking about a word, Denton said pleasantly, that shouldn't be on the internet, and I'd like it not to be on the internet, and I understand from your general counsel that you've decided not to pursue removal, and I want to tell you that I think that's a mistake, and I want to tell you why. May I, sir? Because it isn't your video anymore, honey. It was 2:41. That video stopped being a story about a code about 4 hours ago, Denton said, and the warmth never left his voice for one syllable. Right now, it's a story about a rich woman with a temper, and that's embarrassing, and embarrassing is survivable. We've all been embarrassed. But in about an hour, some 23-year-old with a subscription to a records database is going to notice that a man with a bronze star used a word he isn't supposed to know about a man who doesn't exist. And then it's a different story. And that story is not yours. That story belongs to a lot of people who have been very patient for 11 years. Priya Raman heard her own voice say, "Is that a threat?" "Sweetheart, I'm 78. I don't threaten. I explain, and then I go have lunch." A soft laugh. "Take it down, Priya." "It's not ours to take down. Everything's takedownable. It's on 900 accounts." "Then start with one," Denton said. "Start with the boy." And he hung up. Priya Raman stood in an office on the 41st floor with a dead phone in her hand and did the arithmetic that 15 years had taught her to do in about 4 seconds and came out with a number she didn't like. She walked into Victoria Harrington's office without knocking. "Ma'am," she said, "we have a second problem." It was 2:44. At 2:52, Dennis Park's phone rang, and the number was blocked, and he answered it because he was 24, and nobody had ever taught him not to. "Is this Dennis?" Yeah. "Dennis, my name's Ray. I'm an old man and I'll be quick. That's a heck of a video you put up." Dennis Park sat down on the edge of his bed. "Who is this?" "I'm a fella who's been around a long time," Denton said, "and I want to do you a favor. Are you sitting down?" "Good. Here's the favor. You've got a video up right now that's making you real popular, and about 4 hours from now, it's going to start making you unpopular in a way you don't have the money for. And I'd like to buy it from you before that happens." Buy it. Buy it. You can't buy a video, man. There's like 900 people who already... I'm not buying the copies, son. I'm buying the original. Warm. So warm. The one with the timestamp on it. The one on the phone. The one that proves whose phone it came off of. That one's worth something to me, and I'd say it's worth about $200,000, and I can have that in your account before dinner. Dennis Park stopped breathing. $200,000. He had $1,100 in checking. He had $31,000 in student loans. He had a mother who had cleaned rooms at the Westin for 19 years and died at 58 with an unpaid bill on the kitchen counter. $200,000. "Why?" he said. "Why what? Why is it worth 200 grand?" And there was the smallest hitch on the line. Half a beat. The first thing Ray Denton had done wrong all day. "Because I'm a sentimental old man," he said. And Dennis Park, 24 years old, 800 followers. A kid who wrote software for a company that made an app for parking garages said, "No, you're not." Silence. "Excuse me? You're not sentimental." Dennis's voice was shaking so hard he could barely get it out. "You called me 40 minutes after it hit 300,000. Sentimental guys don't have alerts." It was 2:56. "Son," Denton said. And the warmth was gone now, not replaced with anything, just gone like a lamp switched off. "Let me tell you what happens to boys who get cute." "Okay. Are you listening?" "I'm recording," Dennis said. The line went dead. Dennis Park sat on the edge of his bed in Wallingford and shook for about 90 seconds. Then he threw up in his bathroom sink. Then he came back and sat down and looked at his laptop where a video of a man saying, "It's okay, Bug. I'm right here," had just crossed 400,000 views. And he thought, I don't even know his last name. And he uploaded the phone call. It was 3:01. At 3:05, a white van with a mast on the roof pulled up across the street from Fremont Elementary. It was 3:06 when Marissa's mother, standing in the pickup line, took a picture of it and sent it to a group text with 14 mothers on it. It was 3:07 when one of those 14 mothers, a woman named Kendra Whitlock, who had lived in Fremont her whole life and who had watched that video 11 times that day, walked across the street in a raincoat and knocked on the window of that van. It was 3:09 when the second van showed up. It was 3:11 when Ray Kessler came out to Bay 2 and said, Ethan Carter didn't come out from under the truck. Ethan, son, come out from under there. Ray, there's news trucks at the school. The creeper came out so fast it hit the tool chest. It was 3:12. How many? Ethan said. Kid, I don't. How many? 2, maybe 3. My wife's on the phone. She's Ethan. She's at the school. She's got our grandson there. She says, there's 2 vans and a bunch of people with... Ethan Carter's hands were already out of his coveralls. And Ray Kessler, 68 years old, 34 years in that building, watched a man he had known for 6 years change into somebody else in about a second and a half. It wasn't a big change. That was the thing that scared him. Ethan didn't yell. He didn't run. His face didn't do anything. He just got very, very calm. Ray, he said, where's your truck? Ethan, where's your truck, Ray, son? Ray Kessler put himself in the doorway of that bay, 68 years old and 5'8" and 160 pounds. Son, listen to me for 4 seconds. I don't know what you did before you worked for me. I never asked. I got a rule about that, and I've kept it for 6 years. Ray, get out of the door. I'm keeping the rule right now, Ray said. And I'm telling you something anyway. Whatever's about to walk out of this shop, it ain't gonna be the guy who picks her up. Ethan Carter stopped. He stood in the middle of that bay with his fists open and closed once, and Ray Kessler watched it happen and would talk about it for the rest of his life. She's 7, Ethan said. I know. They're outside her school. I know. Ray, so go get her, Ray said. Go be her dad. Go be the boring guy in the ugly truck who picks her up at 3:15. He stepped out of the doorway. And be him the whole way there. That's all I'm asking. Be him the whole way there. It was 3:13. Ethan Carter got in a truck he'd rebuilt twice and drove to his daughter's school, and he did not speed once. Later, people would say a lot of things about him. That he was a hero. That he was a ghost. That he was some kind of weapon that walked around Seattle in a torn jacket. The truest thing anybody ever said about Ethan Carter was said by a 68-year-old mechanic to a reporter 3 weeks later, and it was this: he drove the limit, whole way. I watched him go. He had 4 minutes and every reason in the world, and he drove 25 miles an hour through a school zone. At 3:16, Victoria Harrington's Suburban pulled up on the north side of Fremont Elementary. Nobody had told her to go. Priya had told her the opposite. Priya had said the actual words: if you go anywhere near that school today, it is the end of your company. And Victoria had said, okay. And then she had walked to the elevator, and Priya had said, ma'am, and Victoria had said, I know, and gotten in the elevator. She sat in the back of the truck and looked out the window at 2 news vans and a pickup line and a knot of parents in raincoats. And she saw a woman in a raincoat knocking on the window of a van, and she saw the van window come down, and she saw a man's face in it, and she saw exactly the expression on that man's face, because she had worn it herself for 19 years. It said, you don't matter, and I'm going to wait until you stop. Ma'am, the driver said. Ma'am, what are we doing here? Victoria Harrington opened the door of her own car, which she had not done in 9 years, and got out into the rain. It was 3:18. She walked up to that van in a bone-white coat with a dried orange stain on the hem, and she was recognized in about 4 seconds. because that's how long it took the man in the passenger seat to look up from his phone where he had been watching her and see her. Holy, yes, Victoria said. Hi. Then it happened all at once the way it does. Doors opening. A guy with a shoulder rig coming around the back of the van. Somebody's phone up. Somebody's boom. Somebody saying her name like a question and somebody else saying it like an answer. Ms. Harrington. Ms. Harrington, do you have a comment on? Ms. Harrington, did you strike a man in a... Yes, she said. Everything stopped. I'm sorry. Yes, Victoria Harrington said again. I did. I struck a man in a cafe this morning at approximately 6:40 in the morning. He was unarmed, he was holding his daughter, and he had not touched me. There's no context that helps me. There's no explanation coming. I did it. Nobody said anything. Reporters, generally speaking, do not go quiet. They went quiet. You can have that, she said. You can run that. That's the whole thing, and it's free. And then she pointed at the school. Now get away from the children. It was 3:20. Ms. Harrington is the man in the... I said get away from the children. Ma'am, this is a public street. Yes, it is. And Victoria Harrington did the second thing that day that surprised her more than the first. She smiled. It's a public street, and I'm a public figure, and I'm standing on it, and I just gave you a confession. So you've got two options. You can point that camera at me right now on a public street and take the single biggest piece of video anybody's going to get today. Or you can keep pointing it at a building full of second graders and hope. The man with the shoulder rig looked at his producer. The producer looked at Victoria Harrington, and every single camera in that street turned around. It was 3:21, and at 3:21, Ethan Carter's truck came around the corner, and he saw it. He saw two vans, and a crowd, and a mast in the air, and he felt his hands go cold on the wheel, and then he saw where the cameras were pointing. They were pointing away from the school. They were pointing at a woman in a white coat, standing in the rain, with no umbrella, alone, saying, I'll answer whatever you want, as long as you want, right here. Ethan Carter parked his truck. He didn't get out for 11 seconds. At 3:24, Lily Carter came out the side door of Fremont Elementary with her backpack on both shoulders, escorted by a fourth-grade teacher named Miss Alvarez, who had been told exactly nothing and who had decided all on her own that the kid was going out the side. She saw the truck. She ran. Ethan caught her. Hey, Bug. Dad, there's news people. I know. Marissa's mom said, Get in the truck, Bug. Are they here about you? And Ethan Carter, kneeling in the rain in a parking lot, said, No, they're here about somebody who's having a real bad day. Get in the truck. He put her in. He buckled her. He double-checked it, because he always double-checked it. And then he stood up and looked across the street at a woman in a ruined white coat with 11 microphones in her face, standing there taking it, and he did not know. He genuinely did not know, and he would think about it for months. Whether what he felt was gratitude or something a whole lot more complicated. She saw him. Across a street, through rain, through a crowd, Victoria Harrington saw Ethan Carter standing by a truck, and she did not say his name. That was it. That was the whole thing she did. A reporter said, Ma'am, do you know the identity of the man in the... And Victoria Harrington looked directly at Ethan Carter 40 feet away and said, No. And Ethan got in his truck and drove away. It was 3:27. At 4:02, Priya Raman watched her phone with her hand over her mouth as Victoria Harrington stood in the rain for 41 straight minutes and answered every question anybody asked her. Yes, I hit him. No, he did not provoke me. Yes, I insulted his daughter. Yes, I asked about the child's mother. No, I did not know. No, that's not an excuse. And if you're offering me one, I'm not taking it. At minute 19, somebody asked, Ms. Harrington, why are you doing this? And Victoria said, because there's a video. So you're only saying this because... Yes, she said. The reporter blinked. Yes, you asked me why. That's why. There's a video. She pushed her wet hair off her face with the back of her wrist. You want me to tell you, I had a moment of clarity, I didn't. I've had a moment of arithmetic. I've been standing here for 19 minutes, and I still can't tell you whether I'm sorry or whether I'm just caught, and I'm not going to stand in the rain and lie to you about it. That would be the fourth worst thing I've done today, and I'm trying to get the number down. Nobody wrote for about 3 seconds, then 30 people wrote at once. Priya Raman on the 41st floor said out loud to an empty office, "Oh my God." It was 4:23. At 5:40, Victoria Harrington walked into Rosie's cafe. The bell rang. It rings whether you want it to or not. Rosie Delgado was closing out. She had a rag in one hand and the register drawer open, and she did not look up, and she said, "We're closed." "I know." "Then you know." "Rosie, that's Ms. Delgado to you, honey." Victoria Harrington stood in an aisle 18 inches wide, soaked through in a coat that would never be a coat again. "I'd like to pay for the coffee," she said. Rosie's hands stopped on the drawer. $2.75, Rosie said. Victoria put a $100 bill on the counter, which was the smallest thing she had, because she'd made her driver stop at an ATM, and she had not used an ATM since 2016, and it had taken her 2 tries to remember the PIN. $2.75, Rosie said again. "I don't have, then you owe me $2.75. Rosie slid the 100 back across the counter with one finger. "Come back when you've got it. Exact." And Victoria Harrington, who had that morning said a number out loud about a coat, stood in a closed cafe and understood all the way down that she had just been priced. It was 5:44. "Sit down," Rosie said. "What?" "Sit down. You're leaking on my floor." Victoria sat at table 6 because it was the only one with the chairs still down. Rosie Delgado poured 2 cups of coffee, brought them over, sat and shoved one across. "I'm not going to be nice to you," she said. "Okay. I want that on the record. I watched you today. Whole thing, standing in the rain like a martyr in a raincoat ad. It was a good show." "It wasn't I said it was a good show." Rosie drank her coffee. "I've been doing this 31 years. You know how many people have snapped their fingers at me?" Victoria looked at her cup. "Guess." "I don't guess." "A lot," Victoria said. "Thousands," Rosie said. "Thousands since I was 19 years old. You're not special. That's the part I think you're going to have the hardest time with. You didn't do a special thing this morning. You did the most ordinary thing in America. You did the thing that happens in my building about once a week and nobody films it." She set the cup down. "The only unusual thing you did was hit him. Everything else you did, honey, that's Tuesday." Victoria Harrington sat at table 6 with her hands around a cup of coffee and could not make herself look up. "My mother waited tables," she said. Rosie didn't move. 22 years. Sizzler, then a Denny's, then a place in Spokane that isn't there anymore. Victoria's voice had gone somewhere flat and very far away. She had a thing she did with her hands. When she came home, she'd sit down at the table and she'd do this thing with her hands like this, like they were... She stopped. She did it, rubbing one thumb into the other palm over and over. And I asked her once, I was maybe 9. I said, "Mom, why do you do that?" And she said her hands hurt. Rosie Delgado said nothing at all. And I remember thinking, I remember exactly what I thought. I've never told anybody this. I thought that's never going to be me. Victoria's jaw was going. I was 9 years old, and I looked at my mother's hands, and I decided she was a warning. It was 5:51. "I was in that Denny's one time," Victoria said. "I was 10, and a man snapped his fingers at her, just like that. 2 snaps, didn't look up, and my mother went over. She went over. And I sat in that booth and I hated him for about 1 second, and then I hated her for about 20 years. She finally looked up and her face was destroyed. "And this morning I walked into your restaurant and I snapped my fingers at you." Rosie Delgado, 63, 4'11", said, "Yeah, you did. I turned into him." "No," Rosie said. Victoria looked at her. You didn't turn into him, sweetheart. He was some jackass in a Denny's in 1996 with a bad tie. You had to build something to get here. That takes work. You did 19 years of work to be able to snap your fingers at me like that. Rosie picked up her cup. Don't you dare make that man the reason. He doesn't get to be the reason. You're the reason. And Victoria Harrington put her face in her hands at table 6 and made a sound that Rosie Delgado had heard maybe 4 times in 31 years behind that counter. And every one of those times, somebody had just found out the truth about themselves in a room with nobody in it to lie to. It was 5:56. The bell rang. It rings whether you want it to or not. Marcus Reed stood in the doorway in a charcoal suit he'd been wearing for 14 hours with his tie gone, and his eyes shot and his phone in his hand. He looked at his former employer sitting at table 6 with her hands over her face. He didn't feel what he expected to feel. Ma'am, he said. Victoria didn't look up. Ma'am, I need to tell you something, and I need to do it fast, because I've got about 10 minutes before I lose my nerve. Marcus came in. He didn't sit. You asked me a question this morning. In here. You asked me what ghost was, and I told you it wasn't mine to say. Victoria's hands came down. It's still not mine to say, Marcus said. So I'm not going to say it, but I'm going to tell you what I can say, because I've had 11 hours to think about it, and I've got exactly one thing, and then I'm out that door. Marcus. 11 years, ma'am. He said it, and his voice held, which surprised him. 11 years I stood behind you, and in 11 years you never once asked me my daughter's name. Silence in that cafe. You paid for her school, Marcus said. Christmas party 2021. You wrote a check on the spot, didn't blink. $11,000. And you never asked her name. He put his phone in his pocket. That's not a crime. I want to be real clear. That's not a crime, ma'am. It's just the whole thing. Victoria Harrington whispered, What is it, Rachel? Marcus said. And he stood there a second, and then he said the thing he'd driven 22 miles to say. You didn't lose today because he turned out to be somebody. You keep waiting for that. You keep waiting to find out what he is like. There's a rank in it somewhere that makes this make sense. He shook his head slowly. Ma'am, you lost today the second you decided which people in that room could do something for you. And you got that wrong at 6:31 in the morning before he ever opened his mouth. Everything after that was just the bill coming. It was 6:03, and that was when Victoria Harrington's phone rang, face up on table 6, and all 3 of them looked at it. The screen said, Denton R. Marcus Reed went white. Ma'am. His voice had changed completely. Ma'am, do not answer that. Who is? Do not answer that phone. Marcus, who is Denton. And Marcus Reed, who had spent 11 years standing behind that woman and had never once told her what to do, reached down and picked up her phone off the table. He's the man, Marcus said, who wrote the report. Marcus Reed held that phone in his hand like it was warm. It rang a 3rd time, a 4th. Marcus? Victoria's voice was very careful. Give me my phone. No, ma'am. Marcus. Ma'am, I need about 60 seconds and then you can do whatever you want, but I need the 60 seconds and if you pick that up, I don't get them. The phone rang a 5th time and stopped, and in the quiet. After it stopped, Rosie Delgado, sitting at table 6 in a closed cafe with a rag still in her fist, said, Somebody want to tell me who Denton is, or am I supposed to guess? It was 6:04. He's on your board, Marcus said. I know he's on my board. You know he comes to 2 meetings a year and eats a muffin and says nothing. Marcus. Ma'am, do you know what he did before that? Victoria opened her mouth and found there was nothing in it. 19 years, 9,000 employees, $2.4 billion. And she had sat across a table from Ray Denton twice a year for 9 years and had never once asked because he'd been introduced to her by a man she trusted with a phrase she'd swallowed whole Ray's good on the government side. No, she said. No. Marcus said. Yeah. He set the phone down on the table face up and pushed it 2 inches toward her and left it there. I met him one time, he said. Landstuhl, Germany, 2015. I was 11 days out of surgery. I had a rod in my leg from my hip to my knee, and I was on so much fentanyl I was seeing the ceiling breathe. And a nice old man came and sat by my bed and told me I was a hero. Rosie said, "Oh, honey." He had a folder, Marcus said. He put it on my chest, right here. He tapped his own sternum with 2 fingers. On my chest, so I'd have to hold it. And he said, "Son, this is the story of what happened to you, and I need you to read it, and I need you to tell me if it's accurate." And I read it. Marcus's jaw worked. And it said a bird went down in a training area. And I said, "Sir, that's not what happened." And he said, "Son, read it again." Silence. And I read it again, Marcus said. And I said, "Sir, that's not what happened." And, Victoria said. And he said, "Son, I'm going to go get a coffee, and when I come back I'd like to talk about your daughter's future." Victoria Harrington's hand went flat on the table. He knew her name, Marcus said. 11 days out of surgery, 4,000 miles from home, and a man I never met knew my daughter's name and how old she was and where she went to school. He looked up. "You never asked it in 11 years, ma'am, and he had it in 11 days. It was 6:07. The phone lit up again. Denton R. Nobody touched it. So I signed it, Marcus said. And they gave me a bronze star and a leg full of titanium and a check every month, and I came home and my wife left in 2019 because I wouldn't tell her one true thing about the worst night of my life. And I got a job standing behind a woman who could afford to never look at me." He was breathing hard now. "And I want you to understand, ma'am, that I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad. I'm telling you because that phone is ringing, and in about 4 minutes you're going to make the biggest decision of your entire life, and I need you to know who's on the other end of it." The phone stopped ringing. 3 seconds later it started again. And Victoria Harrington picked it up. "Ma'am?" She put a finger up. Then she put it on speaker and set it down on table 6 in a closed cafe in Fremont, and Marcus Reed's whole body went rigid because she'd never in 11 years let him hear one of her calls. "Ray," she said. "There she is. Warm as a fireplace. How you holding up, sweetheart? I've had better Wednesdays." Denton laughed, genuinely. It was the worst sound Marcus had heard all day. "Well, I watched you out there in the rain, and I want to tell you something, Victoria, and I want you to hear it from an old man. That took guts. It really did. That was a hell of a thing." "Was it?" "It was the worst professional decision I have seen in 41 years, Denton said pleasantly. "And it took guts. Both things are true, honey. Most true things come in pairs." It was 6:09. "What do you want, Ray? I want to help you." "Ray?" "I do." A pause with a shape to it. "Victoria, I've been on your board 9 years. You know why I took the seat. I liked you. I read your file in 2016 and I liked you. Girl from Spokane, mother waited tables, no last name, no money, built the whole thing with her hands. I've got a soft spot for that story." Victoria's face did something. "You read my file," she said. "Sweetheart, of course I read your file." "In 2016. In 2015, Denton said, "before we ever met." And Rosie Delgado watched a billionaire understand something. It was 6:10. "Now here's where we are," Denton said. "You've got a video. It's a bad video. It's an embarrassing video, and about 100 million people are going to see it by Sunday. That's your problem. I don't especially care about your problem, and I say that with love." "Uh-huh. My problem is on the audio at 2 minutes and 11 seconds. My problem is a word. And my problem is that in about 6 hours, somebody's going to run a Bronze Star citation next to an after-action report and notice that the arithmetic doesn't work. And then it stops being a story about a lady with a temper and starts being a story about a valley." Marcus Reed stopped breathing. "So what I'd like," Denton said, "is real simple, and then I'll let you go eat dinner. I'd like you to put out a statement. Tonight. Before 11. And in that statement, I'd like you to say that you were sleep deprived, that you were under extraordinary personal strain, and that you deeply regret an altercation with a member of the public whose identity you do not know and have never known." "That's all true," Victoria said. "I know it's true." Denton sounded delighted. "That's why it'll work. That's the beautiful part, honey. We don't even have to lie." "So what's the catch?" "There's one more line," Denton said. It was 6:12. "Say it." "You say that your former head of security appears to have suffered an episode consistent with post-traumatic stress, that you hold no ill will toward him, that his service was honorable, and that his family has your full support." Marcus Reed's hand came down on the table so hard the coffee jumped. "You son of a—" "Is that Marcus?" Denton said warmly. "Marcus, is that you, son?" "Ma'am, do not." "Marcus, how's Rachel?" "She's still going to Highline in the fall." And Marcus Reed made a noise in that cafe that no grown man wants another human being to hear. Rosie Delgado got up out of her chair and put both hands on that enormous man's shoulders and pushed him down into a seat like he was a child, and he let her, and he put his forehead down on table 6. It was 6:13. "Ray," Victoria said, "I'm here. Say the rest of it." "There isn't a rest of it. There's always a rest of it." Her voice had gone somewhere Marcus had heard exactly twice in 11 years, both times about 90 seconds before somebody lost a company. "You want me to stand up in public and say my bodyguard's crazy? That's the ask. That takes care of the word. Because a crazy man said it, and crazy men say all kinds of things, and nobody pulls a thread a crazy man handed them. That is a very ugly way to say it. Is it wrong?" "No," Denton said. "So say the rest." And Ray Denton sighed, and it was the sigh of a man who has enjoyed a conversation. "Victoria," he said, "do you know what your company made in 2015? It was 6:15. Everything in that cafe got very quiet. We made a lot of things in 2015. You made a subsystem," Denton said. "Little thing, about the size of a loaf of bread. It went into an integration package that went into a platform that a great many people relied on. You didn't build the platform. You didn't build the aircraft. You built a piece." Victoria Harrington did not move. "And in the spring of 2015, Denton said gently, a bird went down." Marcus Reed lifted his head off the table. "Now hold on. Hold on, honey, before you go anywhere with your face." Denton's voice was almost kind. "I have never once said your part caused it. I'm not saying it now. Nobody ever established that. There were 11 contractors on that platform and a maintenance history a mile long and a crew that had been up 19 hours, and if you want my professional opinion, which nobody ever does, I'd tell you it was probably the gearbox, and it probably had nothing to do with you at all." "Ray, but I'll tell you what's true," Denton said. "It's true that in the spring of 2015 there was a 9-week window where a very determined lawyer could have made your name the headline. And it's true that in that 9-week window a report came out that said the words training exercise and mechanical failure. And it's true that after that report came out, nobody ever asked you a single question." A pause. "And it's true that in November of 2015, you were awarded a contract worth $480 million. And it's true that you were 33 years old and it made you." Victoria Harrington sat at table 6 with her hands in her lap and did not blink. "You didn't know," Denton said. "I want that on the record, sweetheart, because I know exactly what your face is doing, and I want you to hear it. You did not know. You were a kid with a company, and you had no idea a piece of paper was going out that afternoon that was going to save your entire life. Nobody told you. That's the whole art of it. If they tell you you're a co-conspirator, if they don't tell you you're a beneficiary." It was 6:17. "So that's what I am," Victoria said. "That's what you've been for 11 years, honey. And Marcus. Marcus is what it cost." Marcus Reed said very quietly, 19 guys. "I'm sorry, son." 19 guys walked in. Marcus's voice was shaking so badly it barely came out. 10 didn't walk out. "And you're telling me the paper that put 10 of my friends under a training accident is the same paper that made her rich?" "Marcus." Say it to me, Marcus said. Say it out loud. And Ray Denton said, Son, 10 men died because a machine failed at 3 in the morning, and there is not one word on one piece of paper anywhere in this world that could have changed that. All the paper did was decide who else got hurt afterward. And I decided it should be nobody. He said it without a flicker. You want to be angry at me, that's fine. I've been doing this 41 years and everybody's angry at me. But you tell me which one of your friends comes back if I write it different. It was 6:19, and Victoria Harrington said, Ray, why are you telling me this? Because you asked. No, I didn't. Her voice had gone very cold and very clear. I asked what you wanted. You could have said the statement and hung up. You didn't have to hand me 2015. Silence on the line. 2 full seconds of it. And Marcus Reed, who had been reading rooms for a living for 11 years, sat up. You just made a mistake, Victoria said. Sweetheart, you just told me the thing I didn't know, and you're 78 and you don't make mistakes. So you did it on purpose. She leaned toward the phone. You needed me to know I'm dirty. Because I wasn't dirty at 6:30 this morning, Ray. I was a jerk in a coat. And a jerk in a coat can say anything she wants. Rosie Delgado put her cup down very slowly. And a woman who found out at 6:15 tonight that her whole company sits on a covered-up crash, Victoria said. That woman's got something to lose. It was 6:21. You didn't call to ask me for a statement, she said. You called to make me dirty. You called to hand me a steak. And Ray Denton laughed. He laughed for about 4 seconds, warm and rich and delighted, the laugh of a man at the end of a very long career hearing something he liked. Oh, Victoria, he said. You are exactly who I thought you were in 2015. Ray, you've got till 11, he said, and hung up. The phone went dark on table 6. Nobody said anything for maybe 15 seconds. Then Rosie Delgado said, Honey, I don't know what half of that meant, but I've been reading people across a counter for 31 years, and I want you to know that man enjoyed himself. It was 6:23. At 6:31 in a house in Fremont that rented for $1,900 a month, Ethan Carter was making macaroni and cheese out of a box because his daughter had asked for it, and because there are days when you say yes. Lily was at the kitchen table with her homework spread out and one shoe still on. Dad? Yeah. Kayla's brother says you're on the internet. The spoon didn't stop moving. That was the thing about Ethan Carter. The spoon never stopped moving. Kayla's brother's in 5th grade, he said. 5th graders know everything. He says there's a video. There's a lot of videos, Bug. He says it's you and the coat lady. Ethan turned the burner down and turned around and leaned back against the counter and looked at his kid. 6 years. 6 years he'd been figuring out where the line was on this. What she gets. What she doesn't. What's protecting her and what's just protecting him. Yeah, he said. There's a video. Lily's eyes went huge. Did you watch it? No. Why not? Because I was there, Ethan said. It was 6:34. Can I watch it? No. Dad. Bug. He crouched down next to the table so he was level with her. Listen to me. There's about 1 million people watching that video right now, and every single one of them is going to have an opinion about your dad by tomorrow. And most of those opinions are going to be nice, and it's not going to matter because they don't know me. And some of them are going to be mean, and that's not going to matter either, because they don't know me. But I know you. That's right. So can I watch it? And Ethan Carter laughed. Out loud for the first time all day, one startled bark of it. No, he said. It was 6:36 when somebody knocked on the door. Ethan's hand went out and turned the burner off without him looking at it. Bug, go to your room. Who is it? Lily. Room. She went. She was 7 and she'd had a day and she went. Ethan Carter walked to his front door in a rented house in Fremont at 6:37 in the evening and looked through the peephole and saw nothing he expected. He saw Walt Hennessy. He opened the door. Walt. Hey, kid. How'd you get my address? Rosie's got it on the birthday list, Walt said. You gave it to her in 2022 for the kid's cake. Ethan closed his eyes for a second. Yeah, Walt said. That's how it works, son. You've been in this neighborhood 4 years. You're in about 9 ladies' phones. It was 6:38. Walt, this isn't a good... There's 26 people on your street, Walt said. Ethan stopped. There's 26 people standing on your street right now, and I'm the one they sent up to the door because I'm old and I'm slow and nobody's scared of me. Walt jerked a thumb over his shoulder. Now you can look or you can not look, but they're gonna be there either way. Ethan Carter stepped out onto his own porch, and in the last of the light on a wet street in Fremont, he counted 26 people. He knew 9 of them. Kendra Whitlock from the pickup line in the same raincoat. The Nguyen's from 4 doors down. A guy whose lawnmower he'd fixed in 2023 and refused to take money for. Angela the nurse still in scrubs 14 hours into a shift she'd worked before this whole thing started. And 17 people he had never seen before in his life. They weren't doing anything. That was the thing. Nobody had a sign. Nobody was chanting. There was no camera. They were just standing on the sidewalk facing the street, spread out in the rain, in a line in front of his house. Walt, Ethan said. What is this? Well, Walt said. Kendra called some people about the news vans, and then those people called some people. Walt? Son, there's 211 guys in Local 27 retired inside 20 miles of here, and I made about 9 phone calls. And I want you to know it took a lot of restraint to only make 9. Ethan Carter stood on his porch and his mouth wasn't working right. Nobody's gonna do anything, Walt said. That's the whole point. Nobody's gonna do a damn thing. They're just gonna stand here so that if somebody comes down this street with a camera, the first thing they've got to drive past is a bunch of people who ain't moving. It was 6:41. I don't need this, Ethan said. I know. Walt, I really don't need. Kid. Walt Hennessy put a hand on the porch rail. 31 years I did this. 31 years I went in buildings. And you know what I learned? I learned there's 2 kinds of guys. There's guys who let people help them, and there's guys who die in the driveway at 62 because they wouldn't call an ambulance for a chest pain, because they didn't want to be a bother. He looked up. That was my brother. That was my actual brother's son. Randall, 62, sat in the driveway. Ethan didn't say anything. So, you're gonna let him stand there, Walt said. You don't gotta like it. You don't gotta come out. You don't gotta say one word to a single one of them. But you're gonna let them stand there because that's what they've got. And when somebody hands you the only thing they've got, you take it. And Ethan Carter, who had carried a 240-pound man 400 meters through the dark without saying a word, stood on his own porch and could not get anything out of his throat. Then Lily's voice came from behind him, small. Dad? Why are there people? And Walt Hennessy, 71 years old, said, Hey, sweetheart, they're just here because your dad's a good guy and everybody found out at the same time. It was 6:44. At 7:02, Dennis Park sat in a rented office at a law firm in Belltown because a woman named Priya Raman had called him at 4:40 and said one sentence, You need a lawyer right now, and I can't be the one who tells you that, so I'm going to hang up, and you should call this number. He was still shaking. He'd been shaking for 4 hours. The lawyer was 45 and had a name like a bank, and had listened to the Denton call twice with her eyes closed. Okay, she said. Okay, Dennis, how much money do you have? $1,100. Right. She put her pen down. Then I'm going to tell you the truth because you can't afford anything else. You have committed no crime. That recording is legal in the state of Washington, only if he consented, which he didn't. So posting it was a mistake, and I'd like to talk about that later. But here's your actual situation. She leaned forward. Nothing is going to happen to you. Dennis stared at her. Nothing, she said. Not one thing. Because that man called you at 2:52 in the afternoon and made you an offer, and you said no, and 40 minutes later, 400,000 people heard him make it. He can't touch you now. You made yourself expensive." She almost smiled. "That's the only thing that protects people like you, Dennis. Not being right, being expensive." Dennis Park put his face in his hands. "So it's over. For you," she said. "Yes." And Dennis Park started to cry in a conference room in Belltown, 24 years old, and the lawyer let him. And after about a minute, he said the only thing he'd wanted to say all day. "I don't even know his last name." It was 7-11. At 7:40, Victoria Harrington sat in the back of a Suburban outside a rented house in Fremont with the engine off and looked at 26 people standing on a sidewalk in the rain. "Ma'am," her driver said. "Ma'am, I really don't think—" "How many are there?" "Ma'am, there's a lot." "Count them." "Ma'am." "Count them, Stephen." He counted them. It took him a while. 26, he said. Victoria Harrington sat in the back of that truck for 4 full minutes. At 7:44, she took out her phone and looked at a statement Priya Raman had drafted and sent her at 7:12 with the subject line, "This is the one that works. I'm sorry." She read it. It was good. It was so good. It said sleep deprivation and extraordinary personal strain. It said she deeply regretted an altercation with a member of the public whose identity she did not know and had never known. It said her former head of security service had been honorable and that he appeared to be experiencing the after effects of trauma and that his family had her full support and that she would not be commenting further out of respect for his privacy. It was 291 words and it would work. She knew it would work. She had 19 years of knowing what works, and this worked, and at 11 o'clock tonight, it would go out, and by Sunday, she'd be a woman who had a bad night, and by Christmas, she'd be a woman who'd been through something, and nobody would ever pull the thread. All it cost was Marcus Reed. It was 7:47. Victoria Harrington sat in the back of a Suburban and thought about a Denny's in Spokane in 1996. She'd never told anybody the rest of it. Not Rosie, not this morning, not anybody. She'd told the part about the man snapping his fingers. That part was true. Here's the part she'd left out. Her mother had gone over to that table. And she'd taken his order. And she'd come back past the booth where her 10-year-old was sitting, and she'd stopped, and she'd ruffled her hair, and she'd said, "Sorry, baby, 2 minutes." And 10-year-old Victoria Harrington had said, "Don't touch me." She'd said it because the man might see. That was why. She was 10 years old, and she was afraid the man with the bad tie would look over and see that the woman who came when he snapped his fingers belonged to her. And her mother's hand had come off her head, and she'd said, "Okay," and gone back to the kitchen. And they had never talked about it. Not once. Not in 22 years, not through the diagnosis in 2013, not in the room at the end. Victoria Harrington sat in a truck in the rain at 7:49 in the evening and finally understood that she had been apologizing to the wrong person all day. It was 7:50. She got out of the car. 26 people turned around. Nobody said anything, and that was worse than anything they could have said. She walked up a public sidewalk toward a rented house in a bone-white coat with a dried stain on the hem, and 26 people just watched her come. And Kendra Whitlock stepped sideways about 8 inches, and that was all, and it was enough to make Victoria Harrington's chest crack open. Walt Hennessy came down off the porch. "Nope," he said. "Sir, nope." He was 71 and 5'9", and he stood in the middle of that walkway like a fire door. "You want to talk to him? You talk to me first." "I need 4 minutes." "You don't get 4 minutes." "Sir." "Lady, I was in that cafe at 20 after 6 this morning." Walt's voice never rose. "I watched you look at a fry cook and price her. I watched you look at a man in a work coat and price him. I've been getting priced by people like you since 1974, and I want to tell you something, honey. You're not the first one. You're not even the first one this month. You're just the first one who got filmed. I know. Do you?" "Yes," Victoria said. And Walt Hennessy looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face moved about a millimeter. "Huh," he said. It was 7:53. 4 minutes, Victoria said. What's in your hand? She looked down. She was holding a folder. She didn't remember picking it up. It had been in the truck on the seat since 5:20 when Priya Raman had handed it to her in an elevator without a word. It's my company, Victoria said. Walt Hennessy stared at her. It's my company, she said again, and it's a helicopter, and it's a man's name, and I found out about it at 6:15 tonight in a cafe over a cup of coffee I still haven't paid for, and I have 3 hours to decide what to do with it, and I cannot decide it alone. And I know I don't have the right to ask him. I know that. I know exactly what I did to that man this morning. Then why are you here? And Victoria Harrington said, because there isn't anybody else left who won't lie to me. It was 7:56. Walt Hennessy stood in the middle of that walkway for 11 seconds. Then he turned around and hollered at the porch. Carter! The door opened. Ethan Carter stood in the doorway of a rented house in a t-shirt with a handprint still faintly visible under the scar on the left side of his face, and looked down a walkway at the woman who put it there. Nobody moved. 26 people on a sidewalk did not make one sound. You've got 4 minutes, Ethan said. Ethan, Walt started. On the porch, Ethan said. Not in the house. My kid's in the house. And Victoria Harrington walked past 26 people and up 3 steps and stood on the porch of a $1,900 rental and handed a folder to a mechanic. What is this? Read it. Ma'am, I've got a kid inside and mac and cheese on the stove, and I don't have any interest in... Mr. Carter. Her voice broke straight down the middle. Please read it. He opened it. It was 7:58. And Ethan Carter stood on his own porch and read 4 pages, and Victoria Harrington watched his face and learned in about 90 seconds exactly what people meant when they said a man went somewhere else. He got to page 3. He stopped. He read 1 line 4 times. She watched his eyes go across it 4 times. Then Ethan Carter said in a voice with absolutely nothing in it, Your company made the bracket. The what? The bracket. He didn't look up. Page 3. The integration package. There's a bracket in it. Little piece of aluminum about the size of your hand holds the coupling. Victoria Harrington whispered, How do you know that? And Ethan Carter looked up. And for the first time in the whole day, in the whole story, in 11 years, something came up behind that man's eyes that made Victoria Harrington take a step back on her own. Because I picked it up off the ground, he said. Victoria Harrington stood on that porch and could not make her mouth work. I picked it up off the ground, Ethan said again. 400 meters in on my way back out. It was lying in the dirt about 8 feet from a man with his legs under a piece of the tail boom. I stepped on it. That's how I know. I stepped on something in the dark and it went out from under me, and I went down on my hands and I picked it up to throw it, and I looked at it first. It was 7:59. Why? Victoria whispered. Why would you look at it? Because I'd been fixing engines since I was 14, Ethan said. Because that's what my hands do. Somebody hands my hands a piece of metal. My hands look at it. He closed the folder. And it was sheared. Clean. Not bent, not torn. Sheared straight across like somebody cut it with a saw. And I stood there in the dark with 10 of my guys dead behind me, and I thought that's not right. That's not what that looks like when a bird hits the ground. That's what it looks like when the bird came apart first. Victoria Harrington reached out and put a hand on the porch rail. Where is it? She said. What? The bracket. Where is it? And Ethan Carter said, Ma'am, I put it in my pocket. It was 8:01. Down on the sidewalk, 26 people stood in the rain and could not hear one word of it and did not move. It was in my pocket for 4 days, Ethan said. It was in my pocket when they flew us out. It was in my pocket in the hospital. And on the 4th day, a nice old man sat down next to my bed and put a folder on my chest. Victoria's eyes closed. And I read it, Ethan said. And I said, Sir, that's not what happened. And he said, Son, read it again. He did that to you too. He did that to 9 of us, Ethan said. In 11 days, Same folder, same coffee. And the bracket. He never asked about the bracket. Ethan's jaw moved. That's the part. 11 years. He never asked. Because it never occurred to that man that one of us would pick something up off the ground and look at it. We weren't the kind of people who look at things. We were the kind of people you write about. It was 8:03. Mr. Carter? Victoria's voice was barely there. Do you still have it? And Ethan Carter looked at her for a long moment. Ma'am, he said, I want you to think real carefully about whether you want the answer to that. I want the answer. No, you don't. I do. Ma'am, if I say yes, then you know. And if you know, you're not a beneficiary anymore. He said it flat. You're a witness, and there's a difference. And the difference is about $480 million and everything you built. Victoria Harrington stood on a stranger's porch in a ruined coat and said, Do you still have it? And Ethan Carter said, Yes. It was 8:05. She sat down. Not on a chair. There wasn't one. Victoria Harrington sat down on the top step of a rented house in Fremont in a $4,000 coat in the rain in front of 26 people and put her elbows on her knees. Say something, she said. Like what? Like anything. Say anything. Yell at me. You haven't yelled at me all day and it's making me insane. Mr. Carter, would you please just... I'm not going to yell at you. Why not? And Ethan Carter said, Because you're not the one who did it. Victoria's head came up. You didn't write the report, he said. You didn't know about the report. You were 33 years old and you got a phone call in November that said congratulations and you took it, and any human being alive takes that call. He sat down on the step next to her 3 feet away and put his forearms on his knees. Ma'am, I'm not mad at you about 2015. I'm mad at you about 6:30 this morning. That's worse. Yeah, Ethan said. It is. It was 8:07. You want to know the thing I can't get past, she said. No. I'm going to tell you anyway. Figured. You said her mother was dead. Victoria's hands were pressed flat together between her knees. You told me your wife was dead in a room full of people at 6:30 in the morning because I asked, and I heard it. I want you to know that I heard it. I heard every word, and there was a thing in my chest that said, Stop. Okay. And I didn't stop. I know. I've been trying all day to figure out why, she said. And about an hour ago in a car, I finally got it, and I hate it. So say it. And Victoria Harrington said, Because if I stopped, I'd have had to be a person in that room. It was 8:09. Ethan Carter didn't say anything for a while. Yeah, he said finally. That's about right. That's it. That's all I get. Ma'am, you just did the hardest thing there is, and you did it on a stranger's porch. What do you want from me? A certificate. And Victoria. Harrington laughed. It came out of her like something breaking. One ugly wet bark of a laugh in the rain, and then she had both hands over her face, and her shoulders were going, and Ethan Carter sat 3 feet away and did the only decent thing available, which was nothing. At 8:11, the front door opened 4 inches. Dad. Ethan was on his feet instantly. Bug, inside. Is that the coat lady? Lily. But the door had already opened the rest of the way, and Lily Carter, 7 years old in pajamas with penguins on them, stood in her own doorway and looked at Victoria Harrington sitting on her steps. Victoria Harrington's hands came down off her face, and in 19 years of boardrooms and hostile takeovers, and a 31-hour negotiation that lost her $2 billion, Victoria Harrington had never been as frightened as she was at 8:11 that night. Hi, Lily said. Victoria couldn't get anything out. Bug, go inside. Dad, she's crying. I know she is. Go inside. And Lily Carter said, But nobody's helping her. It was 8:12. Ethan Carter stopped with his hand halfway to his daughter's shoulder. 26 people on the sidewalk heard it because it was quiet, and because a 7-year-old's voice carries. Victoria Harrington sat on that step and made a sound like she'd been hit. Sweetheart, Ethan said, and his voice had gone rough. Sweetheart, listen. Some people have to be sad for a while, and it's not our job to make it stop. Sometimes it's just our job to let them be sad without being alone. You understand? Lily thought about that. That's what you did when Mom died, she said. And Ethan Carter, 6 years and 1 day into the hardest thing he'd ever done, said, yeah, that's exactly what I did. Lily nodded, like this was reasonable because she was 7. Then she looked at Victoria and said, your coat's ruined. Victoria whispered, I know. I'm sorry I spilled juice on it. And Victoria Harrington said, don't. It came out of her so hard that Ethan's hand came up. Don't. She was shaking her head over and over. Don't you say sorry to me. You spilled a juice. That's all you did in this whole world, honey. You spilled a juice, and a lady who was having the worst day of her life dropped something heavy on you, and that was never ever about you. And Ethan Carter went very, very still, because those were his words. She'd been sitting at table 6 at 6:39 in the morning with her jaw set, and she'd heard them, and she'd kept them. It was 8:14. Okay, Lily said. Bye. And she went inside. And the door clicked shut, and Victoria Harrington sat on a step and cried in a way she had not cried at her own mother's funeral. And Ethan Carter sat down next to her and did not say one single word for a full 3 minutes. At 8:18, he said, 2 hours and 40 minutes. What? Denton gave you till 11. It's 8:18. Victoria wiped her face with her wrist. How do you know about 11? Marcus called me at 7. Marcus called. Ma'am, that man has called me 9 times today. Almost a smile. He's making up for 11 years. It was 8:19. So, here's where you are, Ethan said. And I'm gonna lay it out flat because nobody's done that for you today, and you've had a whole lot of people be gentle at you. He turned the folder over in his hands. Option 1. 11 o'clock you put out Priya's statement. It's a good statement. It works. You say you were tired. You say you're sorry. You say Marcus is sick. And by Sunday, you're a woman who had a bad night. And Marcus is a crazy guy who said a word. Nobody pulls the thread. Denton goes to lunch. Your company's fine. He shrugged. And you get to keep everything except one thing. What's the one thing? Ma'am, Ethan said. You know what it is. Victoria Harrington looked out at 26 people standing in the rain. Option 2, she said. Option 2, you tell the truth. About the crash. About all of it. And I want you to hear what that costs, because nobody's said it out loud to you yet, and Priya can't. Ethan's voice didn't change at all. You go public with 2015, and you don't get a redemption story. That's not what happens. What happens is a 9-figure legal exposure and a stock that opens down 40 on Thursday, and about 9,000 people who work for you finding out on the news that their jobs might not exist in a year. Real people, ma'am. People with kids and mortgages who never touched that bracket and never heard of that valley. Victoria sat very still. That's the part nobody tells you about doing the right thing, Ethan said. It bills everybody. So you're telling me not to? No, ma'am. Then what are you telling me? I'm telling you it's a real decision, Ethan said. I'm telling you it's not a movie. I'm telling you that anybody who says this one's easy is selling you something. It was 8:23. What would you do? She said. And Ethan Carter laughed, short and dry. Ma'am, I've had 11 years to do it, and I haven't done it. Victoria Harrington turned her head and looked at him. I've had that bracket in a box in my closet since 2015, Ethan said. 11 years, in a shoebox, behind my winter stuff. And every single year on the anniversary I take it out, and I sit on my floor, and I hold it, and I think about 10 guys, and then I put it back in the box. Why? You know why. Say it. And Ethan Carter said, because I signed a paper, and the paper says, if I talk a bunch of things happen. To me. What things? Ma'am, I've got a 7-year-old, and no wife, and no family, and $52,000 a year. He said it very quietly. You want to know what things? That's the things. It was 8:26. Victoria Harrington put her hand over her mouth. They'd take her. They wouldn't have to. Ethan looked out at the street. That's the beautiful part, right? They never have to do anything. They just have to make sure you know they could. 11 years, ma'am. Nobody's ever knocked on my door. Nobody's ever made a call. The only thing they ever did was sit next to a bed with a folder and say the word daughter, and it's held for 11 years, and it never cost them a dime. That's the whole thing, Victoria said slowly. That's what he did to me on the phone. Yeah. He didn't threaten me. He just made sure I knew what I had to lose. That's the job, Ethan said. That's the whole job. He's not a villain, ma'am. That's the part people never get. He's an administrator. He genuinely believes he's the guy who keeps 10 dead men from turning into 40 ruined ones. And the terrible thing, the thing I've never been able to get around in 11 years, is that he might be right. It was 8:29. So we're both stuck, Victoria said. Yes, ma'am. Then what do we do? And Ethan Carter said, I don't know. It was 8:30. And that was the moment Victoria Harrington understood that nobody was coming. At 8:34, a car door slammed down the street, and Marcus Reed came up that sidewalk through 26 people, who parted for him without being asked because he was the size of a refrigerator and because most of them had seen the video. Ethan. Marcus. Ma'am. He stopped at the bottom of the steps. Ma'am, I've been driving around for 2 hours, and I need to say a thing, and then I'm gonna go home. Victoria stood up. Marcus. Put out the statement. Silence. What? Put out the statement, Marcus said. Priya's statement. 11 o'clock. Say I'm sick. Ethan was on his feet. Marcus. Say I'm sick. Marcus Reed's voice cracked wide open. I've thought about it the whole way here, and it's the only one that works, and I'm the cheapest thing on the table, and I'd rather it be me than 9,000 people who never did anything. Brother. Ethan, I've been crazy in public before. He was crying and he didn't care. In 2019, I sat in a Denny's parking lot for 6 hours. In 2019, my wife had to come get me. It's already on paper somewhere, man. It costs me nothing. It costs you everything, Ethan said. It costs me nothing. Marcus. Ethan came down one step. Brother, listen to me. You've been carrying 11 years of a lie that says you got recovered like a wallet. 11 years. And this morning you finally said a true thing out loud in a room full of people, and it was the first true thing you've said since 2015. He put a hand on the man's shoulder. And now you want to stand up and say I was crazy. You want to sign it again? Marcus Reed's face came apart. I don't want anybody else to get hurt, he said. I know. Ethan? I can't have anybody else get hurt because I said a word. Marcus, look at me. Ethan's hand tightened. You didn't say a word. You said my name, and it's the first time in 11 years anybody said it, and I want you to hear me. I'm glad. It was 8:38. You're glad. I've been dead for 11 years, Ethan said. You looked at me in a cafe and you said, Ghost, and I want you to know that for about half a second before I got scared, the thing I felt was relief. Marcus Reed put his forehead on Ethan Carter's shoulder, and Ethan led him and 26 people on a sidewalk looked at their shoes. At 8:41, Victoria Harrington said, What if there's a third one? Both men turned around. What? You gave me 2 options, she said. There's a third one. Ma'am, Denton wants a statement by 11. Her voice was picking up speed. He wants me to say Marcus is sick. He gave me a deadline. Why did he give me a deadline? Ethan Carter's head came up very slowly. Say that again. Why does a man who can do anything need me to do something by 11? It was 8:42, and Ethan Carter said, because he can't do it himself. He can't do any of it himself. Victoria was on her feet now. Think about it. He called Priya. He called the boy. He called me. 3 calls in 6 hours, all of them asking somebody else to move. That's not a man with a lever, that's a man with a phone. Her hands were shaking. Ethan, the report's been public for 6 years. 6 years, and it held. And you know why it held? Because nobody looked. That's it. That's the entire security system. Nobody looked. Ma'am. And this morning, 900,000 people looked at a cafe. It was 8:44. Ethan Carter sat down on the step like his legs went. He's scared, he said. He's terrified. Victoria's laugh was half a sob. Ethan, he told me about 2015. He told me. You said it yourself, he doesn't make mistakes. He told me because he needed me dirty by 11 o'clock because he's got nothing else. He can't sue me. He can't sue the boy. He can't sue you because to sue you he'd have to say your name in a filing. She was shaking. The only weapon that man has ever had in 41 years is that everybody's alone. And he made 3 phone calls today because for the first time in his career, we're not. It was 8:46. Nobody said anything. Then Marcus Reed said, "There's 9 of us." Ethan looked up. "There's 9 of us, Ethan. 9 guys signed that folder. 9 guys have been sitting in 9 kitchens for 11 years thinking they're the only one." His voice was rising. "And I've got 7 of their numbers in my phone right now because I'm the guy who calls everybody on the anniversary and nobody ever picks up." "Marcus, they never pick up," Marcus said. 11 years, Ethan. Nobody ever picks up." He pulled out his phone. "You want to bet they pick up tonight?" It was 8:48, and Ethan Carter stood up on his own porch and said, "No." Marcus stopped. "No, we're not doing that." "Ethan, Marcus, I'm not going to be the guy who calls 7 men at 9 o'clock at night and asks them to blow up their lives because I had a bad morning." Ethan's voice was flat. "They've got kids. They've got pensions. Danny Ruiz has got a boy with a feeding tube. Marcus, you know that. I'm not calling Danny Ruiz." "Then what?" "I'll do it alone." "No." "Marcus, you always do it alone." Marcus Reed roared it right there on a sidewalk in Fremont, and 26 people jumped. "That's the whole problem, man. That's been the problem for 11 years. You carried me 400 meters, and you wouldn't even say your name. You sat in a shoebox in your closet for 11 years by yourself. Everybody in this whole thing has been alone in a kitchen." It was 8:50. "That's how he wins," Marcus said, and his voice dropped to nothing. "Ethan, that's how he wins. He doesn't win because he's strong. He wins because he made sure everybody thinks they're the only one." Ethan Carter stood on his porch and did not say anything. And Walt Hennessy, who had been standing at the bottom of those steps for 20 minutes with his hands in his coat pockets, said, "Son." Ethan looked at him. "You know what a Mayday is?" "Walt, 31 years, Walt said. "You know what the actual hardest part of the job is? It ain't the fire. Everybody thinks it's the fire. It's the Mayday. It's a grown man on a floor with his air out, and he's got to key that mic and say his name and say, 'I need help.'" Walt's voice was very steady. "And you know what kills firefighters? Not calling it. Waiting. Every single time, son. Every guy we ever lost, we lost in the gap between when he knew and when he said it." Ethan Carter's hands were shaking now. "You've been on that floor 11 years, Walt said. "Key the mic." It was 8:53. At 8:57, Ethan Carter went inside his house and went to his closet and moved his winter stuff and came back out onto that porch with a shoebox. He handed it to Victoria Harrington. "Ma'am," he said, "don't open it." "Then why?" "Because I need my hands," Ethan said. And he took Marcus Reed's phone out of Marcus Reed's hand. Marcus said, "What are you doing?" And Ethan Carter said, "Calling Danny Ruiz." It was 8:58. It rang 4 times. And then a man's voice said, "Marcus, buddy, it's late as everything." "Danny." Ethan said, "It's Ethan." The silence on that line lasted 11 seconds. Marcus Reed counted them. Then Danny Ruiz said in the wrecked voice of a man who has not said a true thing in 11 years, "Ghost." "Yeah. Ghost, I saw the video. I know. I've been sitting here since 2 o'clock, man. I've been sitting in my kitchen." And Ethan Carter closed his eyes and said, "Danny, I need help." It was 8:59. At 9:04, Danny Ruiz said, "Who else is in?" At 9:11, a man named Wade Turnbull in Colorado picked up on the second ring and said, "I've got it in a coffee can." Ghost, "I've had it in a coffee can in my garage for 11 years. At 9:19, a man named Sol Achebe in New Jersey said, "I wrote it all down, everything. That night, in the hospital, 41 pages. I never showed anybody. I hid it in a Bible man who was I hiding it from." At 9:26, a man named Ken Delaney did not pick up. At 9:31, Ken Delaney called back and said, I'm sorry I had to go stand in the yard." At 9:46 of 9, we're on a conference line that Priya Raman set up from her car with her personal credit card because she'd stopped being an employee at 7:12 and hadn't told anybody. At 9:48, Victoria Harrington said the words, "There's a piece of my company in it," and the line went absolutely silent. And then Wade Turnbull said, "Ma'am, we don't care about your company. We care that somebody says out loud that Tommy Vance didn't die in a training exercise." And Victoria Harrington put her hand over her mouth and made no sound at all. It was 9:52. At 10:14, Priya Raman said, "I need to tell all of you something, and I need to do it once. If we go tonight, I lose my job and my career and my clearance and my house. I've run it. That's the number." And Victoria said, "Priya." "Ma'am, I'm not asking for permission," Priya said. "I've had 15 years of this. I've buried 9 of these. I just wanted to say it out loud one time so that somebody heard it before I did it." Nobody spoke for a second. Then Rosie Delgado's voice came on the line because at 9:20, Walt Hennessy had gone and gotten her and said, "Honey, I heard it." It was 10:16. At 10:41, with 19 minutes left, Victoria Harrington's phone rang. Denton R. She put it on speaker in the middle of a porch, surrounded by 4 people and a shoebox and a conference line with 6 voices on it. "Ray," she said. "Sweetheart, it's 20 of. I'm going to bed. Where's my statement?" And Victoria Harrington said, "Ray, do you know what my mother's name was?" Silence. Victoria. "You read my file in 2015. You know everything about me. So say her name." 3 seconds. "I'd have to look it up," Denton said. "Yeah," Victoria said. "See, that's the thing about your whole system, Ray. It only works on one person at a time." She looked around a porch. "There's 6 of them on a phone right now, 6 of 9. Wade's got a coupling nut in a coffee can. Saul wrote 41 pages in a hospital bed. Ethan's got the bracket." The line went perfectly, absolutely quiet. "There's no bracket," Denton said. And Ethan Carter leaned toward the phone and said, "Sir, it's in a shoebox, and it's got my thumbprint in the dirt on it, and it has been 8 feet from my bed for 11 years. Ray Denton did not say anything. For the first time all day, Ray Denton did not say anything. "Ray," Victoria said gently, "you've got nothing. You never had anything. You had a folder and a coffee and 9 men in 9 different rooms who all thought they were the only one." She leaned down toward the phone. "And I'm going to say something to you now that a mechanic said to me at 6:40 this morning, and I've been carrying it around all day like a rock in my shoe. Victoria, you went in their pockets and took it." It was 10:47. "You're going to lose everything," Denton said. "Yes," Victoria said. "Probably." "That company is your whole life." "Yes." "You worked 19 years. Ray," Victoria Harrington said, "at 6:30 this morning, I hit a man in the face because he wouldn't be smaller than me. And I've had 16 hours to think about what kind of person that makes me, and I'd like to be a different one before I die." And she hung up. It was 10:48. At 10:51 p.m. Pacific Time, Priya Raman hit send on a statement that was 104 words long. It did not say sleep-deprived. It did not say extraordinary personal strain. It did not say the word regret. It said, "This morning I struck a man in a cafe. His name is Ethan Carter, and in 2015 he pulled 9 men out of a helicopter crash that my company's component may have contributed to and that I benefited from the concealment of. I did not know. I know now. Every document we have is going to the Inspector General tonight. My general counsel has advised me not to say any of this. There are 9 men. 10 more didn't come home. Their families were told it was a training exercise. It wasn't. It was 10:52. The stock opened down 51 on Thursday. The lawsuits took 4 years. Victoria Harrington sat for 11 depositions and did not once take the 5th. She lost the company in the 2nd year. She lost the house in the 3rd. In the 4th year, a woman in Bakersfield named Alma Vance sat across a table from her and said, "You're the one who told me my son didn't die in a training accident." And Victoria said, "Yes, ma'am." And Alma Vance said, "Thank you." And Victoria Harrington went out to her car and sat there for an hour. Ray Denton was never charged with anything. He was 78. He gave one deposition, and in it he said 41 times that he did not recall. He died in 2029 in a very nice facility in Arizona, and nobody came. Marcus Reed never got another security job. He didn't want one. He runs a program now out of a converted garage in Kent that does exactly one thing when a guy calls somebody picks up. Rachel graduated from Highline in 2028 and then from UW in 2030, and she works with him. He tells every single person who walks in there the same story, and he always starts it the same way, which is, "I got carried once." Dennis Park never took the money. He works for a nonprofit now that does records requests. He met Ethan Carter face-to-face exactly one time 8 months later, and the first thing he said was, "I never knew your last name." And Ethan shook his hand and said, "Carter." And Dennis cried in a parking lot. Rosie's is still there. Same awning, same 11 tables. There's a plaque now screwed to the wall over table 6 that Rosie hates and refuses to remove, and it says nothing about heroes. It says, "Everybody eats here." And Ethan Carter still fixes cars. That's the part people never believe. There were 3 book offers and a movie option and a man from a network who flew out twice. He said no to all of it. He gets up at 4:40. He makes the coffee in the dark. He wakes up a girl who's 13 now and taller than her mother was, and who still eats pancakes at table 6 at 6:20 in the morning, and Rosie still tells her she's too smart for whatever grade she's in. He never told her the whole thing. He told her most of it when she was 10 at that same table, and she listened, and at the end she said, "So you were a hero." And Ethan Carter said, "No bug. I was a guy who could carry." Victoria Harrington comes in on Wednesdays. She waits tables. Not for a story. Not for a photograph. She lost the company and the house and every friend she had. And she was 48 years old and had never once in her life done a day of work with her hands. And Rosie Delgado gave her a Wednesday shift because Rosie Delgado had buried a husband and knew what a person looks like when they've got nowhere to be. She's bad at it. 11 years in, and she's still bad at it. She drops things. And every Wednesday around 6:30, Rosie watches her come out of the kitchen and sit down for her break and do a thing with her hands, rubbing one thumb into the other palm over and over because they hurt. She's never once complained about it. Not one time in 11 years, because that's the whole thing, and it took her a slapped face and a lost fortune and a dead woman in Spokane to learn that the world is not divided into people who matter and people who serve. There's just people. And the only real power any of us ever had was the power to look at somebody who couldn't do a single thing for us and see them anyway. Ethan Carter never needed anybody to know his name. That's why he was the strongest man in the room.